Hello and welcome to part 4 of the TSSI series. Today we have a fairly full panel. Let's introduce everybody. Derek, you should need to mute yourself, or somebody else need to mute themselves. They're making some noise. So who do we have? We have got Emmanuel.
Hey everyone.
From Enfeluradsak. How did that sound?
Is this thing on?
I can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, it's Emmanuel from the Swedish Marxist podcast, For a Lost Cause, or En förlorad sak in Swedish.
And we have Derek Varn from Symptomatic Redness. Derek, do you want to say hello?
Hi, and I'm from Symptomatic Redness, Emancipation, Inside Zero Books. I don't know what all do I do these days? I don't even know anymore. Anyway,
stop showing off, Derek. Mute yourself. Right, we got Lexi.
Hey, what's up? I'm just figuring out the finer points of pronouncing Emmanuel's podcast, and I'm from different podcasts.
I can teach you. I can teach you whatever you need to know about Swedish.
And for a lord sock.
Let's try that again. En förlorad sak.
En förlorad sak.
Except it's not M as in
right.
It's N as in noise.
En förlorad sak. This is going to be
useful.
There
you go. There you go.
All right, great.
Yeah, Lexi,
awesome.
We have the distinction of being on a podcast that neither one of us can pronounce.
Yes. Yeah. Until now, Derek, you're on your own. En förlorad sak, something like that. All right, let's roll.
Okay,
that's perfect, actually.
Yeah, that's nearly as good as Lexi's French pronunciation, which is really something to behold. Now, Pouya. We also have Pouya, who's a long time from Alpha to Omega listener and a Sumside listener too. Pouya was on last week. Do you want to say hi?
Hey, I'm Pouya. Nice to see everybody.
Yay.
Welcome back, Pouya. Okay, now, so we have the 5 of us here today. We also have Alex from last week is in the chat. I want to give a shout out also to Alex for becoming a Patreon, and also to a brand new Patreon one just there a few minutes ago from Jake P. Okay, so last week we finished chapter 2 of Andrew Kleiman's Reclaiming Marx's Capital. It was
finally, right?
Yeah, finally. So chapter 2 was a major one. It was basically giving us the TSSI's interpretation of what Marx said. So that was part 1 of that chapter. And part 2 was a brief overview of the alternatives. Putting most of it was looking into the dual system interpretations and also the single system interpretations, and some on the value form dudes too. So we've done all of that, and we've done our introduction. Now we're getting into the kind of history of the controversy in a bit more detail. I find the book's structure a bit repetitive. I don't know if it needed a better editor or something, but let's get into it. So I always go to Lexi first. So let's go to someone different first. Emmanuel, you were first last week. Derek, do you want to take up the introduction here to the brief history of the controversy?
Sure. So basically, it talks about the reemergence of Dimitri's laboralist theory of value. And I'm noticing a trend that in the 70s, every dead Russian who ever said anything remotely partially dissonant gets resurrected somehow, like by necromancy. But anyway. And then he just basically says, I'm going to summarize these debates in the introduction. He mentions his anti-Whiggish perspective on the controversy. So he does not think that this has been a progress of knowledge as so much as a muddling or a mystification. And that's 3.1.
Okay, very good. Let's just crack into 3.2. I don't think there's much kind of rehashed a lot of that stuff there before. So he's going to get into 3.2. Maybe I'll take this one. Dmitriev's laborless theory of value. Okay, so he's talking about this kind of obscure Russian guy that kind of came up with this stuff initially. Does it have a date there? Does it have a date? He said that Shraffa was the first guy, was supposed to be the only person outside of Russia to have a copy, which has probably helped him to come up with his critique of Marx's Capital. Okay, let's see. Dmitriev argued that the rate of profit was physically determined in Ricardo's theory, and he set out to defend the notion that it's physically determined in reality as well. Okay, let's see what else we have here.
Just to jump in about the date, this is 1897.
Okay.
So this is early. Like, what? Does anyone know the context for what Dmitriev like came out of? Is he like an early proto-marginalist or something? Like, I felt like I didn't get that from the chapter. I felt like I got how he was used, but not how he came about.
Okay, let's have a look. What is this? What's his first name? Does he even get a name? He doesn't even get a first name. So, not sure. Maybe somebody can in the chat, or somebody can see if they can find out who he was. Okay, so it says here that he kind of followed the physicalist critique all the way and pursued the logic of this argument to its conclusion that there could be profit even if no living labor were performed at all. Let me highlight this. We can imagine a case in which all products are produced exclusively by the work of machines, so that no unit of living labor participates in production. An industrial profit may occur, a profit which will not differ essentially in any way from the profit obtained by present-day capitalists. Okay, so this is following it to its logical conclusion. I don't have any problems with that. You know, that if it is a physical one, you know, you don't need values in a physical one to create value. You don't need labor time to give a profit rate. So it seems to me entirely consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're just looking at it in production of use values.
Yeah, in physical outputs. So let's key. Okay, so this is interesting. This is like the first kind of math we're going to meet, which is an incredibly simple bit of math, but it's got some. It's kind of staggering as a mathematician that this could slip by people and not be critiqued as a flaw. So we're going to look at the case where the machines are creating machines with no labor involved. Okay. So for our purposes, it'll be sufficient to study Dmitriev's proof. Okay. So let's have a look here what he's saying. We get to this equation here. Can everybody see this equation here?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 5p. Yeah. Which is,
there seems to be an issue with your screen sharing on YouTube.
Okay, let me have a check.
There we go.
So I think you need to somehow lock your screen as the dominant one, or whatever.
Every time we talk, it goes away.
Main screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me give me a second here, and I'll see if I can present to everyone. There we go. Is that it? This should be a second now. Okay.
Yeah. So finding the context in this Dmitriev, as I've been doing as Tom's been talking, is nearly impossible. I just want to know that.
I did find his name.
Yeah, me too. But I can't. I found like 50 people with that name, and I can't find the exact birth date, so I can't figure out who the hell he actually is.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is the right guy. Vladimir Karpovich Dmitriev. Apparently, he's a Russian economist born in November 1868. Yeah, there's only a German Wikipedia article on this, this is the first time I've seen the word Transformationsproblem, which however you pronounce that in German probably sounds way cooler.
Transformationsproblem.
It does sound way cooler.
Yeah.
See, now you're whatever you just said, whatever you said after that is going to be right, because that sounds cool.
Again, your opinion, your ability to actually say stuff. All right.
Yeah. Okay, now, okay, let's have a look at this equation. Okay, so we got, can everybody see the screen there now?
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
correct on YouTube now as well.
Yeah, okay, so we got 5p equals 4p plus r times 4p. Okay, so p is the per unit price of the machine, and r is the profit rate. Okay. In other words, the total price of the output, 5p, will be set equal to the total cost of the input plus the profit or markup on the cost. Okay? Dividing through by p, as Dmitriev himself did, we obtain 5 equals 4 plus 4r. And after a bit more algebra, we find that r equals, we just minus the 4 from the right-hand side, we find that 1 equals 4r, or r equals a quarter, or 25%. Okay, this rate of profit is physically determined. It equals 25% because the output of machines exceeds input by 25%. Okay, so we had 4 machines, we now have 5. What's our rate of profit in a physicalist sense? 1 machine. And what's 1 over 4? 25%. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, I thought this example was really great for explaining what physicalism is.
Yeah, it's a brilliant example. When I read, there's like 2 examples in this book that made my head kind of explode and just go, oh, that's why. And this is one of them. So, so let's keep going.
Okay, could we just stay here a little bit, because
go on, yeah.
I think this equation really sort of unveils a lot of the problems with simultaneous evaluation and why it's fundamentally incompatible with Marxist theory, other than, you know, the Kleiman's
the simultaneous. Yeah.
So, like, just looking at this, if you just look at, you know, the 5 machines that you produce, the price of that is, of course, going to equal the price of the 4 machines that you use to produce the 5 machines, plus a profit or a markup, right? Okay, on its face, this seems like an intuitive thing. Like, if you buy 4 machines and you produce a 5th with the 4 machines, of course you're going to want to mark up the price on that so that you can draw a profit, right? So on the face of it, this seems kind of legit. However, what struck me is that in Marx's theory, like, we're always assuming that that things sell at their value, right? We're assuming perfect competition. So if perfect competition, in a world of perfect competition, the R times 4P should be 0, or it should be negligible, right? So essentially, what it's saying is 5P equals 4. Right.
Emmanuel, explain why you think that.
Right. So the problem here stems, there are many problems with this equation, but one thing that struck me is on the right-hand side, you have 4P, so 4 times the cost of the machinery that you bought, right? Plus a markup, right? So the capitalist buys 4 machines, and you know, that's the cost of production. And the capitalist is going to sell the 5 machines for whatever it costs the capitalist to buy the 4 machines, plus a markup, right? Because if you don't have a markup, you won't be able to drive any profits. However, in perfect competition, margins diverge or approach 0. So if this capitalist was in a market where everyone else was doing the same thing, the R times 4P, the thing that's added to it, the markup, would approach 0. So with infinite competition comes margins that approach 0. So in abstracting from any sort of intellectual property or whatever, and if this capitalist does not have a monopoly on these machines or whatever, the R times 4P should approach 0, right? Does that make sense?
Well, I think this is a marginalist theory, is it not? But I think what Marx is doing is he's abstracting from competition. So instead of assuming perfect competition, I think he's assuming like the essence of the commodity.
Yeah. He is. In Marx's actual theory, that's exactly right. But
I don't know if your critique here is correct, Manuel. I think here we're just setting outputs equal to inputs.
Yeah, we are. But the critique here is like, okay, what determines the R times 4P? What is? I mean, Marx's theory is that there are constraints to any markup that a capitalist can add upon their cost of production, right? So the R times 4P thing is where the problem here is, or where one of the problems are. The other problem is where the hell is the price of the machinery coming from? Because what is actually being done here is there is a sneaking in of added productivity that doesn't.
Okay, let's just read the next section. Let's read the next section and see how we get on. Yeah, I think it may be clear it up for people. Okay, let me just highlight this here. Sorry to butt into you there, but
no, that's fine.
Given that Dmitriev's book opens with pains, I always mispronounce that, pains of praise to mathematics, and that his work has been regularly extolled as a model of rigor, this argument is surprisingly slipshod. Dmitriev argues a case in which no labor is performed, and thus in case in which there is arguably no value. Yet he took for granted that the machine has a positive price. So why do you do that? Let's see why that's true. In other words, he assumed precisely that what we need to prove if the machine is free, he assumed precisely what we needed to prove. If the machine is free, then P equals 0, and it's impossible to divide true by P as he did. So in this one up here, he basically divided across by P because they all have a P in it to get this 5 plus 4 equals 4R one. But if P is 0, so Marx would say that the machine would have that the price would be 0 because the price would be 0 because the machine was free. So then he's dividing by 0 across, and in the basic thing in mathematics, you can't divide by 0, it's undefined. So instead of finding that the rate is positive, we find that the original equation becomes basically 0 equals 0 plus 0. So 0 equals 0. The rate of profit is therefore undefined. Okay, so that's like a very, very simple flaw with this idea of a physical rate of profit when there is nothing but machinery doing it and no labor. Is that you can't know that you're assuming that there is a price for the thing. You can't assume there is a price because if one theory says there won't be a price and your theory says, oh well, there is a price, well, you have to prove that you can actually divide by P. So in other words, what he actually ends up showing is that when machines create new machines without any value input, we have no idea if there is value or not. Yeah.
And he also assumes that the capitalists can just do any markup at a whim. And that there are essentially no constraints to.
Well, the markup, right, depends on the amount of surplus labor produced. But I think in the next section,
exactly,
he talks about right, if the machines there's no value added to them, so we just have their cost of production and they produce more machines. The the rate of profit isn't simultaneous, and it isn't because if it's temporal, the price of the outputs is equal to the price of the inputs because there is a fall in the price during the production process.
Exactly, and that would lead you to actually believe that 5 machines is equal to 4 machines, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it should be
even
equal
if,
to 4/5. So 4/5 of P2 equals 4 P1, or 1
Yes.
P1. So it's a pretty kind of interesting. Let's read this bit here. There's good reason to believe that the machine will indeed be free. Dimitriev's fully automated economy is able to generate an ever-increasing output of the machine, unconstrained by any natural resource limitations and at no additional cost. It's thus quite plausible, at the very least, that the machine's price would quickly fall to zero. If you think about it, the machines would just start reproducing themselves towards infinity.
Right.
They'd just be sitting around everywhere, and everybody go, "Hey, do you want a shoemaking machine?" "Oh, fuck yeah, I'll have one." And they'd just be growing like blackberries growing wild in bushes, or breathing air. It'd just be ubiquitous. It'd go to infinity. Curiously, Dmitriev himself reaches analogous result when he goes to consider a system of goods produced solely by animals. Hence, he concludes that there is no foundation for any of the references to various natural processes, such as the breeding of animals and yields, which do not necessitate human tending of the plants, etc., as independent sources of profit on capital. Okay, so if you go for a walk now, where I am in London, you go out into the woods or something, there'll be wild blackberries growing everywhere. You can pick them, you can eat them off the tree for nothing. There's no reason to believe that the machine wouldn't fall into that same category, as they are able to reproduce themselves towards infinity with no labor. So it's strange that this example could be taken seriously. Anybody have any comments?
No, it's just when I'm confronted with a mathematical argument, I think, like a lot of people, I don't know, get a little nervous. And if I could imagine, like 100 years ago or whatever, like being confronted with this smarty pants Russian economist and, being confronted with a mathematical argument and not really thinking about how that mathematical argument got symbolized. And it's important, even if you're not all that mathematically literate, to understand that you can just smuggle assumptions in mathematically. Like here, the two assumptions are that P will not equal 0, and that input and output can be put on two sides of the equal sign. Like, those are not negligible assumptions.
They're very large assumptions. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here comes another one.
Also, that there is nothing constraining the markup, as you said, Pouya. Like the markup would be the surplus value created, but according to Marx's theory, constant capital by definition only transfers part of its value, and there is no new value added. So where does the R times 4P come from? In this equation, it's just made up. It doesn't hinge on anything.
It just assumes there's a rate. It assumes there is a rate of profit on each machine.
Yeah, it assumes that the capitalist can just buy four machines, slap a markup on the price that he paid for the 4 machines, and sell it on the market at a profit. But that's exactly what has to be explained, which is what Marx's theory wants to attempt. So again, I mean, you either, as Kleiman goes through why P should equal 0 in Marx's theory, but my point in the beginning was you can also point out that equally the R times 4P part of the equation should approach 0, or should be negligible. And so what the equation really says is 5P equals 4P. The 4 machines have magically reproduced to create another one of themselves. And thus the equation is self-refuting and inconsistent. 5P cannot possibly equal 4P.
Let's read this next section, just the bit that just what Slexi was saying there is how they assumed that they were simultaneous. Let's read. This is where Andrew makes this explicit. Yet, even if we assume the machines have a positive price, Dmitriev's demonstration is marred by another fatal error. He does not prove, but simply assumes that valuation is simultaneous. In other words, that the machine's input price equals its output price. It seems to me that Marx's theory implies that they are not equal. Marx holds that the value of output equals the value transferred from the inputs plus new value added by living labor. But since Dmitriev assumes the economy is fully automated, there is no living labor, and thus no new value added in this case. The five output machines are therefore only worth as much as 4 input machines were worth. Thus, the price of a machine falls by 1/5, and the rate of profit is consequently 0. This last result is what Dmitriev claims to disprove, of course, but he fails to do so because he assumes rather than proves that the input and the output prices are equal. So it's like assumption upon assumption. He assumes that you can set them equal, and then also he assumes that you can divide by p, that it's not going to be non-zero. Okay.
I've also heard a similar argument from a follower of Steve Keen, and the thermodynamics one. Do you know this one?
I haven't fully looked at that. He has one. He's trying to come up with an energy theory of production. Is that it?
Yeah, one of his followers made a similar argument against the labor theory of value to me, where they claimed that the labor theory of value is false because, like, gasoline produces work.
Yeah, Stephen King has argued stuff like that before, and
his stuff is entirely. I think it's entirely spurious. That stuff. I haven't studied it.
It seems like a category error where you're confusing the energy, the potential to do work, with labor, which is human effort. Those aren't the same thing. So, I mean, the assumptions. A lot of the assumptions that you see in these theories are basically conflations of categories. And while it is annoying to have to parse out these fine-tooth categories, it's absolutely necessary. And we have to insist that no, when you collapse them down, you're not arguing the same thing. Stop it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's important to just point out, right, that we have different assumptions. We're walking into this with different assumptions. The professional economists or whatever Marxists are, right, they're spitting at each other over these things and saying this is a completely irrational choice. No one smart could ever make this decision. As long as you're aware that it's a decision, and that those decisions are justified by what you get out of them.
Yeah, like I think Lexi, you said before that Keen was a Marxist or some kind of post-Marxist. Like, I've heard him explicitly saying that, like, when he read Marx first, that he thought that it made no sense that machines can't create value. So
right.
He disagrees with it on the very core, basic level.
It's a little more complicated than that. When he first read Marx, that's what he thought. Then he put it away for a while, and he was like a Marxist. And then one day he was just looking at some big old, I think, oil rigs or something, and he's just sitting there, and his original intuition returns. There's no way those machines can't be creating value, and he breaks with Marxism. But even to this day, if you talk to him, he will defend his work as being dialectical post-Keynesianism.
Interesting.
So, and he's not a Marxist in the sense that he wants to replace capitalism. So maybe I think that's the criterion for me. Does he want to replace capitalism?
I just think he's just a Keynesian. He's like a social democrat. That's what I put him. Okay, who wants to? Are we okay with that? That's a very important. I think that's a very important equation. For me, that's one of the most important, simple examples of. Explains kind of in detail why you have difficulties. Why a lot of just with a simple equation explains a lot of some of the difficulties we're going to come across. This idea of valuing inputs and outputs, and this idea of physicalism. I think it's a very simple but kind of deep example. For me, There's 3 or 4 bits in the book that you can break all the arguments down into, and this is like an example of one that people can easily get their head around without reading 250 pages.
Yeah, I do wish Amog was here, because Amog, and maybe you can speak to this, Derek, was commenting that Kleiman's structured his book along the lines of there's a cardinal error that leads to all these other errors, right?
Yeah.
And this would be it. This simultaneous valuation is actually probably more important even than assuming that P is not 0.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this ability to take this example and translate it into an equation like this, where input costs are on one side, output costs are on the other side.
Well, I think Amog is wrong. I think it is. I think there is one basic fallacy is valuing inputs and outputs, and that's the basic fallacy that's repeated again and again. I don't really know why he's against that or why he thinks there's more than one, but for me, that's it. I think he's wrong.
Well, I think in general in Marxist economics and in the parts that are like correct and applicable, there's a lot more issues than just what's in this book. But in terms of the issues that Andrew is arguing against, it does appear that all the complications come from the logic at work here.
Right, except for value theory, which is why he doesn't address it, because it actually isn't the simultaneous problem. So
right, and yeah, there are other problems, but like this here, yeah, when you look at this equation, it makes value redundant. Physical properties cause everything.
Yeah, and there's also the dual systems of price and value. That is also an issue.
Yeah, although this book is mostly an attack on an attack on simultaneous valuation.
Mm-hmm.
I think things get more tricky when it comes to the price and value stuff. But if this book does anything correct, it argues that you cannot do this with Marx. It is logically incompatible with his work.
Oh yeah, sure. But yeah, he gets to the price and value stuff more later in the end of his chapter.
This is true.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good to maybe do the next bit, the falling rate of profit controversy? Lexi, do you want to try this one?
Oh yeah, the good old falling rate of profit. So, falling rate of profit coming out of volume 3 of Capital. Most of the critics are focused on counter tendencies. And again, Marx lists these counter tendencies, and Marx also believes that these counter tendencies can stop a fall in the rate of profit. It appears almost indefinitely, is what he thinks. So it's not all that novel that, for instance, Joan Robinson and Paul Sweezy are emphasizing these things. But let's see. So even if the rate of profit may not fall, that's not the same thing as saying what the Okishio theorem is saying. Now, see if we can get Okishio's first name here. Yeah, Nobuo Okishio. He's a Japanese Marxian economist. He was in 1979. He was elected the president of the Japan Association of Economics and Econometrics. How about that? So the Okishio theorem says that the rate of profit cannot fall. Not that it may not fall for countervailing reasons, but that it cannot fall because of technical change. And this is because of the reasons that Kleiman is going over with Dmitriev's model. The Okishio theorem employs simultaneous valuation, that is equalizing the input and output costs, and it has to arrive at physicalist conclusions. So labor-saving technological change boosts productivity, which has to cause the rate of profit to rise mathematically QED. Like, if you make these assumptions, this is what comes out. And the example that he has here on the bottom of page 44 is if the 4 input machines above, I like this word, beget 6 output machines instead of 5, the rate of profit rises from 25% to 50%. Now, this only holds true if we're doing simultaneous valuation. That's never really questioned. It's not, Andrew says it's not proven, but I think it's fair to call these things assumptions, right? Like, so Okishio only proves that Marx is wrong about this if you make these assumptions. And if this specific assumption, I should say assumption, period. And so he just gives a whole laundry list of people that end up criticizing law from what he calls the physicalist perspective, because he has some respect for the people that look at the math and are like, oh, well, then my value doesn't matter. Because that's mathematically at this point true. Like, once you simultaneously value inputs and outputs, value does not really matter. And so
that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like the falling rate of profit goes out the window, becomes physical. We see from that 4p and 5p version that, immediately it's a physical output and the rate of profit is the number of machines. This the crux of the entire argument is nearly that first equation. It's a very powerful equation.
It's just mathematically, like literally an encoding of the opposite of Marx's conclusion.
Absolutely.
Like the math
if
itself.
If you think about it, it means that no value can be added, because you're setting the value of one time to be the value of the next.
Yeah.
So it means that, I don't understand. It just immediately means you can't increase your value. Now, I don't know if I'm expressing that precisely.
I mean, it can't.
No, yeah, that's the implication. The value can't increase in simultaneous models.
But surely they do later on when we get to some of the simultaneous ones. You see, the value does increase. So I don't know if I'm stating it exactly correct.
Yeah, well, yeah-ish, they do, but see, since they're simultaneously evaluated, if you increase productivity to, okay, now you have 100 tons of wheat instead of 50, then the left-hand side is, simultaneous valuation is saying that if output prices equal input prices, then they're both co-determinant, right? So you could interpret this as saying that the total value doesn't actually really increase, because the output prices can, since there's an equal sign there in the middle and no theory of causation, it could equally be that the output prices, damn it, I'm not explaining this well, but you're right, Tom. In my interpretation of what simultaneous evaluation is, it's saying that they're both equal magnitudes of the exact same thing. So
let me just be a bit more precise then. That the outputs of the new outputs, the 5p, that you're setting them equal to the price. Okay, let me shut my mouth and let's just keep going until we get to some good examples. Okay, and we can explain it more clearly. Anything else in this part on the falling rate of profit?
Well,
okay, there's a lot of
runs through
people.
List of names, which I'm just gonna not comment because I recognize a couple of those, but only a couple.
Yeah, there's some Marxists. There's one of your guys in here. Samuelson's in there, and Romer. Romer's an analytical Marxist, isn't he?
Yeah. So the schools being criticized, specifically Schraffa and the Ian Steedman's Schraffianism, those are the assumptions for analytical Marxists. All right, they've destroyed Marx's theory, and so we need to reconstruct it with neoclassical tools. I was corresponding with Andrew Kleiman, and I wasn't aware of how these debates really played out. I was telling them that I really liked his book, and I read his book, and I read one of the Analytical Marxists, and he was like, "Analytical Marxists? Those guys are the worst. Why do you like them?" Like, because they're exactly the type of mathematical economists that just assume that Marx is already wrong. Because, well, I mean, look at this stuff. Like, fuck it. Like, look, the literature says Marx is wrong, so we need to move on. Yeah, I'm approaching this, and it was nice. I got to talk to Dave Zachariah recently, and we're kindred spirits in being kind of analytical Marxists that want to take value seriously. And because I'm convinced that Andrew actually makes some really good arguments against all of the assumptions of the analytical Marxist economists. Yeah. So that's all I have to say about that little list of names, mostly pointed at Romer. And yeah, let's move on to the transformation problem. Who wants to have a go at the transformation problem?
Should I do it?
Yes, once you stop whatever that infernal crackling is.
Oh, sorry, that's my. I'm like on my phone and my keys are attached to it.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, the transformation problem. Let's see. Okay, so the transformation problem is in volume 3 of Capital. And this is where Marx goes from values to prices. So, we have capitals with different organic compositions. If speaking in purely value terms, each individual capital should have a different rate of profit. But the transformation into prices, there's an equalization of profit rates. And so that's the transformation problem in volume 3. And in 1894, the book says, no, never mind. In 1896, two years after the publication of volume 3 in 1894. In 1896, Bauwerk, which is an Austrian school economist, he's kind of renowned or infamous, and
one of the few good ones, I think. One of the very few good Austrian economists. I think it's yeah. I'm sorry. Sidetrack. Please go on.
Okay. I haven't really read him, and okay. So, okay. So he says that in volume 1. Marx asserted in volume 1 that commodities tend to sell their values, and he had promised to show real-world phenomena which appear to contradict this assertion, do not in fact contradict it. But in chapter 9 of volume 3, failed to overcome this contradiction. Moreover, Baumberwerk argued Marx's account is tautological and meaningless, because aggregate value price equalities are irrelevant. And then Andrew says he discusses this more later in the book, which I didn't really totally understand what Baumberwerk's argument was just from this section. And maybe he'll discuss it further. Maybe I'll get a better idea of what his argument is later in the book.
So is this the idea that he says that it's meaningless?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think he never really gets into that, because I think that pretty much nobody could understand his argument, and it never really stuck. Am I being correct there with people?
What do you mean?
Am I summing that up? I think like that part of his argument where he said they were meaningless, that never really stuck, and it wasn't exactly clear what he meant.
Okay, so tautological, right? It means that Marx is making an assumption that of something he needs to prove. So that they're like basically it's an arbitrary solution to the transformation problem. It's ad hoc. It doesn't it fails, and it's not like a systematic. It's not a systematic procedure. Like it doesn't work on its own terms. That's what I would draw from that section.
Okay. Simultaneous author critiques of Marx's transformation account are rather different. They are not based on the claim that Marx asserted that commodities tend to sell their values, and then they do not allege that this solution is tautological or meaningless. Okay, so pretty much Andrew goes on to say that the simultaneous critique, which began with Borkowitz, is much more effective at trying to, he says, prove that Marx's transformation account is internally inconsistent. And they were the first to actually try to prove that it was inconsistent on Marx's own terms, alleged Marx's own terms.
Yeah, to correct myself, Baum-Bauer is saying that it's arbitrary, and the simultaneous authors are saying that Marx's account fails on his own terms.
Mm-hmm. And okay, and then he says the crux of Borkowicz's argument is that Marx's account produces a difference between input and output prices, and that this difference leads to internal contradictions, specifically to spurious disruption of a reproduction process. What do you think he means by this?
I think that's just what we went through, is that when you put input and output prices equaling, that the value stuff breaks down.
But he says of the reproduction process.
Yes, because I think we'll get to it later on. I think it shows that in a simple scheme of reproduction, that the actual values weren't able to maintain the same level of output. If you had a static economy with static productivity and static amount of labor, that when you valued inputs and outputs simultaneously, you end up with problems. That's pretty much what it means.
Okay, so you said he talks about this later on? I
think so, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just wait.
Again, this chapter is like an introduction. It's like another introduction. To me, it's like, I think this chapter is kind of, I don't like the structure of the book sometimes. I think there's too much introduction and talking about the thing. There should be more actual tables and math, and it could do with a better editor. That's the way I look at it. But
hey, maybe
I've got Bauert's argument here in front of me. If anyone wants to know what he is actually commenting on.
Okay, go for it.
Yes, please.
Right. So this is so Bauer famously wrote a critique of Marx called Karl Marx and the Close of His System, and he's basically saying that Marxist value theory isn't even an answer. So here's the quote. It is, however, not even an answer to another question. It is no answer at all. It is a simple tautology. For as every economist knows, commodities do eventually exchange with commodities when one penetrates the disguise due to the use of money. Every commodity which comes into exchange is at one and the same time a commodity and the price of what is given in exchange for it. The aggregate of commodities, therefore, is identical with the aggregate of the prices paid for them, or the price of the whole national produce is nothing else than the national produce itself. Under these circumstances, therefore, it is quite true that the total price paid for the entire national produce coincides exactly with the total amount of value or labor incorporated in it. But this tautological declaration denotes no increase of true knowledge. Neither does it serve as a special test of the correctness of the alleged law that commodities exchange in proportion to the labor embodied in them. Unjustly verify any other law one pleased. The law, for instance, that commodities exchange according to the measure of their specific gravity, etc., etc., etc. So he's basically saying that, yes, okay, total value equals total prices equals total labor. So frigging what? That's Barwerk's argument.
Yeah. His example of gravity is really stupid because you could actually measure the weight of all the things and show that the price doesn't correlate with weight.
Actually, he goes on with a mathematical argument that makes a little more sense. But like what I think is important with Barwerk's argument is that Marx's chain of argumentation, as it were, how Marx builds his argument to end up with the conclusion that value is derived from labor actually matters, because Barwerk is attacking it from the he's doing the sort of, you know, value is by definition labor interpretation, and if that is your interpretation, then I think actually Barwerk's argument holds. But we can put up a link to the book. But it's a little more sophisticated than that afterwards, because he actually proves that, like, okay, the total specific gravities of all the commodities in an economy is equal to all the commodities produced in that economy. Therefore, you know, value is specific gravity. But that's not how Marx actually reaches his conclusions. But yeah, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it might be.
I think it's interesting. I think it's very interesting. And if there's any like critic that I don't know if Andrew answers well enough, it's probably Barwerk. And I think that he annihilates Borkowitz and spends like most of the time on Borkowitz. I think probably for a decent reason. Is that now there's an umlaut in this name. I'm looking at an umlaut. That's got to do something. Barwerk. Barwerk. Oh, nice. Barwerk. All right, sweet. Barwerk. All right.
It's Bawerk. It's Werk.
Bawerk. Thank you. All right.
Bawerk.
I'm a proper European now. All right.
There you go.
Bawerk. Ooh.
If only there were some more French ones. I really like the French. Listen to Swampside Chats. All the hilarity that I go through. Even Derek's French ones are particularly bad as well.
I make no claim to pronounce French, nor do I pronounce the French words the same way twice either.
Yeah,
that's right. There's no consistency. That's my favorite thing, because you think all these guys are different authors. Who's this guy? Who's he talking about now?
No, actually, yeah. Well, I was trying to figure out who the hell Dov was for like the longest time.
Yeah,
like
Dov and Dobe and Dobber, and I was like, who are these three guys?
Whatever. My French is plenty to sneeze at. Anyway, we were just talking about Borkovich's, and I just highlighted a bit there. Mm-hmm. This is talking about his reproduction process. So he would basically put together a simple core model, I think, for a simple reproduction, and showed how if you do inputs and outputs, the reproduction process breaks down, and that therefore would disprove Marx. So here's what Andrew says here. After supposedly proving this claim, Borkovich corrected Marx's account by means of a model that eliminated the difference between input and output prices, and in doing so, severed values and prices into two discordant systems. So this is the dual system that we did last week, being repeated here again. The magnitudes of constant and variable capital in the system differ from the magnitudes of the magnitudes of constant and variable capital in the price system. Okay.
Okay, so we kind of did that already this week. This is why I think this chapter is very repetitive. Can we go on to the next one? The next sub-chapter? Are people done with this?
Yeah, sure.
I don't
It's
think there's much. We're going to get it again, you know?
worth noting that yeah, I don't know how to pronounce Bortkovich, but whatever. He was popularized by Sweezy. Paul Sweezy.
Yeah, here we go here. Nonetheless, Borkovich's correction and his alleged proof of Marx's self-contradiction were heavily endorsed and brought to the attention of the English-speaking world by Sweezy, the most prominent Marxist economist of his generation. In his famous book of 1942, The Theory of Capitalist Development, he went so far as to call Borkovich's model the final vindication of the labor theory of value, the solid foundation of Marx's theoretical structure. There you go, everybody. My God, you know, these guys get such big names. Like Sweezy is this big name.
Sweezy's a giant.
A giant, and you can write like sentences like that.
I mean, Sweezy was the only Marxist economist that ever came up in my normieverse life. Like I had like a New Left burnout, like friend's dad who like became a doctor and stuff, but was, you know, kind of like chopping about his left-wing credentials. Like, yeah, man, I read Sweezy. I read Monopoly Capital, you know, like just came up.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is Monthly Review does a lot of good works, kind of despite their glaring economic holes, but their economics, with the exception of Samir Amin, like Sweezy is important not just because of his own theory, but also who he publishes, and their economic theory gets flat out weird. So it's just, I don't understand how they come to some of the conclusions they come to.
It's certainly unique. Like you can't accuse them of being rank conformists. They're very like purposeful and being very strange.
Yeah, but there's something about this that reflects the nature of academia, though. Remember how I said academia like over rewards novelty even more than like say capitalism does.
Yeah, see how brainwashed I am, man.
And there's something about that seems to come out of that clamor. Even though I think Sweezy was also like, you know, he wore a good ascot, so one can't assume he was just an academic.
True. All right, we've touched on the ascot. Can we move on to 3.5?
Yeah, Sweezy was also a big-time Maoist, wasn't he?
From what I understand, Monthly Review is of that orientation.
Well, that's not true. I used to believe that too, and then I actually have gone through all their work. Keeping Christopher Caldwell in print. They keep a lot of like the Political Marxist in print. They keep a lot of Trotskyist in print, particularly particularly the coterie around Hal Draper, like a bunch of them. So they can't be said to be cleanly. I
mean, Haymarket Books is Trotskyist, but they'll publish, you know, Rebecca Solnit or whatever. Like, you know.
Yeah, but they employed Hal Draper and they employed Ellen Macon-Woods.
Oh,
so
never mind.
Like Robert Brenner was on their editorial board at one point. So
yeah, point made.
So my only issue, my thing is, I think over time they become predominantly Maoist because they're interested in imperialism. That's always been a driving thing, and that used to be more of a trot thing than it is now.
Yeah, another interesting fact people mightn't know, I think I'm right in saying this, that Norman Finkelstein was a student of Sweezy.
And he was a hardcore Maoist for like a month.
Right.
Oh, more than a month.
No, it sounded like he spent maybe 10 years.
Yeah, a decade. So. It was the 70s, but in non-70s time, that could have been a month. In the internet, he would have already gone through 3 phases.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Marxian economics is general equilibrium theory. Anybody want to take this? Lexi, you've done, how about Manuel? Manuel, do you want to take one here now?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Let me try this one if you want.
Yeah.
Let me try it. Okay, let me try it. Okay, so this one is going on about how Borkovich was very aware that what he was talking about was diverged markedly from Marx's. Okay, so let's have a look here and see where he talks about this. Yeah, this is interesting.
Oh yeah, it's the Leon Walras thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As
I
Borkovich-style
Walrus.
as Borkovich-style models came to be a standard tool of Marxian economics, it became natural to think of their properties as properties of Marx's value theory, and to seek textual justification for their Marxian heritage. Okay, but like moreover, input-output techniques became a popular tool of economists, ready and waiting for Marxian economists to apply them to problems of value determination. To do so, they had to evaluate their inputs and outputs simultaneously. It was in this environment that there arose the nearly ubiquitous interpretation that Marx's own value theory was simultaneous, if not indeed physicalist as well, which is kind of crazy. Borkovich saw the situation more clearly. He vigorously attacked what he called Marx's successivist conception of determination, in which economic factors are regarded as a kind of causal chain in which each link is determined in its composition and its magnitude only by the preceding links. Like that is
that's the fucking theory, man.
That's the whole fucking theory right there. Like even if you were to think about, you're not really into economics and you're more into the philosophy Hegelianism, that's Hegel. You know what I mean? Like there's no defense for me to seeing Marx as not a successivist. In fact,
also like this is the fucking definition of what determination means.
Yeah.
Like if you don't accept
the law of thermodynamics
chains,
yeah,
and like every link in the causal chain determines the next one, then what the hell do you mean by determination? All you can speak of are equal magnitudes, which is, I suppose, what leads them to simultaneism, because simultaneism by nature is a non-causal theory, right? This is what we said before, that in simultaneous evaluation, value increases cannot possibly happen because there is no causality. The output prices, the total output prices equal total input prices, and so they're both equal in value. So there is no increase going on. There's no causality going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it does increase, but it's in physical terms. It's not in value terms.
Exactly. Yeah. Use values increase. Like you get more wheat, or more machines. You get five machines instead of 4. But the equal sign there in the middle says that the value of the 5 machines is exactly equal to the value of the 4 machines. So there's no plus
the rate of profit on the 4 machines.
Plus the rate of profit, right? But the
that's an assumption. That's an assumption.
That's an assumption. So yeah, but even given that, so like the output prices equal the input prices plus some conversion factor, right? The conversion factor is not value. they're both equal magnitudes still. There's no greater magnitude at one side of the equality sign than the other, except for now there are more use values. But it sort of reduces down to use values and thus to physical quantities, because there's no causality.
Let me read this next bit, which is good, I think. Against this, he praised the school led by Leon Walras.
Cuckoo Kachu.
Cuckoo Kachu. You're waiting for that one, Lexi, I can tell, for propagating a more realistic view of economic relations in which the various economic factors or elements condition each other mutually. Which I don't know, I just do not understand that, but let me keep going. Although Borkovich spoke of successivist and mutual determination, not temporal and simultaneous determination, which are now more common terms, they meant much the same thing. So Borkovich was very aware that what he was proposing was the opposite of Marx's.
Yeah.
Over time,
it's all right here. Yeah, Kleiman has unveiled the historical conspiracy. You know,
Well, I think if you're, to be pluralist about it, it's just so clear how different the intuitions motivating the models are. They are just opposite intuitions. And when you reach these sort of points of debate, again, how do you decide between these two sets of assumptions? Cash value. What do you get out of it? Right? And so the point is not to spit at, I can't believe you would make another decision. The point is like, look what's going on here. This person wants to do something else. That's what's going on. Like,
Yeah, I have no problem with people doing something else. You know what I mean?
And Andrew, I think, respects Bortkovich because Bortkovich knows Bortkovich is doing something else.
Yeah. So can we just key into this small little phrase, which I find very interesting. The various economic factors or elements condition each other mutually. Can anybody really explain what the hell that actually means in reality?
Yeah, that's Sraffa's argument, just stated in different terms. So any economic factor or element that is used in production or consumption determines all of the other factors or elements. So if you have corn, labor, TVs, and books, say, they're all co-determinate of each other. So they're all mutually conditioned by, any commodity is mutually conditioned by all other commodities.
How does that make any sense? How can me making like a cake be conditioned by somebody building a nuclear power station?
Well, it is in physical terms. Like it analyzes the amount of commodities produced in an economy, or the wealth of an economy as described by Marx, i.e., how many use values there are. Essentially, this is true, but it has nothing to do with capitalist production or commodity production. It's just saying that, okay, so how is you baking cake determined by the productivity of a nuclear power station or whatever, nuclear power flour, and the more electricity and power they have, the more flour they can produce, and the more flour there is in the economy, the more cakes are produced. But that's only analyzing use values. That's only analyzing physical quantities. And as long as you do that, well, then yeah, it's true. And in energy terms, for instance, in terms of entropy and energy conversion, it's true that all factors condition each other mutually, but that has nothing to do with the Marxist theory of values or prices, and certainly nothing to do with how things work in a capitalist economy.
It is kind of dialectical. There is a sort of mutual co-determination that is kind of ghostly.
Dialectical in the Maoist folk magic sense of dialectics.
Well, in the sense of mutual co-determination, in the sense of unity of opposites, second law.
Like yeah, so like Taoist.
No, this is Engels, though. That's the sad thing. If you want to like piss on all that, you have to take it to Engels. But
do you hear me saying nice things about dialectics of nature? No,
I don't.
No, but to me, like, I suppose everything is somewhat mutually determined, but like not without time. That's the main thing. You need time, and
yeah, that's what the folk.
I mean, Marxist theory is the theory in which productivity matters, and in physicalist theories, productivity doesn't matter, except there is now more stuff, but the value of the more stuff produced is exactly equal to the value of everything that came before. So there's no increase going on. at all. There's no increase in value or anything. So yeah.
I mean, you know, it's not exactly folk magic. There is, even in physics, like mutual co-determination. There are instances of this in science. So I don't want to be too dismissive of that set of intuitions. I just think it doesn't work for an economy. Like,
yeah. This is quantum pairing. Okay, let's.
Yes, exactly what I was thinking of, Tom.
Yeah, let's keep going. Okay, so he just goes on here to talk about how this simultaneous general equilibrium model school that led by Walras has become dominant in neoclassical economics. And you know, and he mentions some like other dudes here. You know, certainly somebody who I would have an awful lot of respect for, like, is the mathematician Van Neumann, Bortkovich, Dmitriev, Leontiev, and Schraffer. You know, they've set up the foundation of Schraffianism and most of modern Marxian economics. So essentially, this equilibrium school now is entirely dominant, bar a few holdouts like Kleiman and Freeman and Carcetti and take your pick of some other people.
There are increasingly people outside of Marxism too who are dissatisfied with this kind of equilibrium economics. And if I'm not mistaken,
yes.
is Steve Keen one of them? Like, isn't like he skeptical
Yes.
of this kind of equilibrium?
Yeah,
Like
he
a lot of the post Keynesians. Like, so at first when I was reading this book, I'm like, hold on, am I going down a crank hole here? And I'm like, I did some research. I'm like, yes, but it's a pretty big one. In a you know, counter hegemonic to an ideologically important school of thought.
Yeah, so it is a crank hole in the sense that it's a minority view, but it's a minority view that's held by. So it's not just held by Marxists that this is weird, and I think there's a lot of MMTers and MMT Marx hybrid people who also think equilibrium assumptions are stupid.
Oh, things are getting hot in here.
No, it's true. There is Steve Keen has been doing his modeling and that he's been doing, which are essentially temporal, which is very ironic because in his book where he trashes Marxism in the what's that book called again? I keep forgetting it. What's it called?
Debunking Economics.
Debunking Economics,
which is a good book if you rip the Marxism section out of it and set it on fire.
Yeah, and at the very end of the Marx of that one where he's critiquing, he does the transformation problem and he does all this stuff about how you value inputs and outputs at the same way. At the end, he has like a one-liner about the TSSI where he says that these guys try to reform it by adding temporal, time into it, and then he just said something like, "Yeah, but come on, lads, give it up now. It's over." And he spent the whole first half of the book when he talked about the neoclassical economics, talking about how there's no time in it now. That's rubbish. It's hilarious. He just uses the exact opposite arguments to suit his argument. So
right. So I thought Derek was doing a hit on you there, Tom, but. Because you're the MMT, TSSI is compatible heretic.
I am a TSSI and I'm also an MMTer, but not as in.
How?
What do you mean?
Well, okay. If you're an MMTer,
none of the models. Remember, none of the models.
It breaks a single system.
It doesn't. None of the models that we have in here have money in them. Remember that. The melt.
Yes.
Wait. Stop for a moment. Let me talk. Specifically, the melt is a way of introducing changes in the money, in the amount of money in the economy. So we'll see that very later on. So you can use the melt when you can say that there is inflation in the economy. So all of these things do not deal with commodity money. There's nothing to do with commodity money in any of these arguments. But let's not get there because we'll get there later.
Why don't you come over here and we'll take you to the pub and I'll smack you in the face.
It's Scottish. You've been saying all these European accents so well and you left yourself down so badly.
I thought it was pretty good.
We have one thing from the chat. Ben Bavark destroyed the Austrian economy. That's pretty
actually
strong.
true. No, I keep a close eye on my enemies, as it were, and most of the people who are really into Austrian economics don't read Bauer anymore, except for his theory on the time value of money and interest and so on, which is a shame because he is fucking the only rigorous Austrian economist out there. I guess that's why they don't read him.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, he's good, and like the stuff that no one reads by Schumpeter is good, and what everybody does read is generally pretty terrible. So
yep.
Okay, can we keep going? Let's keep going. I think we've kind of done that to death. Let's talk.
I've been looking at Leon Walras's name for a half hour. Let's move.
That's right.
Valras.
Yeah. No, let's have a look. Less bad jokes. I'm the only one allowed to do bad jokes on this podcast. We're going to get no joking.
Save the dad jokes for the dads.
That's true. Dad jokes. Let's see now. Chapter 3 or 3.6. Who wants to talk about the master's tools? Anybody remember what the hell this is about?
Yeah, of course. So I always found this deployment very funny, but just to briefly go over the title, the master's tools is a reference to an Audre Lorde quote. I love the way that he deploys this because it is such a radically different and sort of awkward context. But here it is. I suspect that Paul Samuelson, who we're going to get into, may have understood something that Audre Lorde, the African-American lesbian poet, wrote about some years later in a different context. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And so this actually sums up the section pretty well. Samuelson may have understood, in other words, that simultaneous evaluation is incompatible with Marx's critique of political economy. Given Samuelson's exceptional abilities as a mathematical economist, this is not unlikely. He may thus have suspected that the tools of equilibrium theory would help reshape the views and research of young radical economists who adopted them. The disintegration of the Marxian school during the last 30 years suggests that its adoption of these tools has indeed had a profound effect. So the basic thesis of this section is that, and this is my favorite part of this chapter, is an actual like big deal economist, a Nobel laureate. He was giving a National Science Foundation grant to talk about Marx. And apparently he had his ass handed to him in a debate with Schraffa, who, the more I look into Schraffa, is like the James Bond of economists or something. Holy shit. Anyway, but
impressive but evil.
Yeah, after getting his ass whipped by Schraffa publicly in a debate, Samuelson takes it upon himself to kind of basically promote Schraffa's revision of Marx as a radical alternative to mainstream economics and to classical Marxism, and that if you young whippersnappers really want to be serious about the Rev and stuff, kids, what you should really be doing is taking these neutral modern tools and applying them to your radical theory. And if you don't really see the assumptions embedded in the math as ideological, I think this is very seductive. Like, I want to use the sharpest tools of my time to make a Marxist point. And so if you don't recognize that embedded in these tools is an ideological assumption, more or less. And again, it can be a valid scientific assumption, but it happens to support capitalism, the way it runs, the way it processes an argument. And I think Kleiman is successful in arguing that Samuelson might have had like duplicative motives here, which is, again, this is conspiratorial thinking. This is, you know, a bad faith reading, but it's also sensitive to that common ground between error theory and, you know, ideology, right? Like why is someone making, and why is someone who isn't normally a Schraffian, he just sort of popped in for a little bit. Why would he promote Schraffa what did he say? In this age of this age
In the
of
stage of Leontiev and Straffa.
yeah, which led Levine. I don't know if that's Andrew Levine, but I'll have to look into that. This age of, so Levine writes a paper called "This Age of Leontief and who?" Like, so as Derek was saying, Samuelson was doing some necromancy on Schraffa.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I really am uncomfortable with, but I think Kleiman may have stronger grounds than normal. There is a tendency, not so much in this book, but also in like speeches and stuff, to see all of everything that is not TSI as a conspiracy against the true Marx. And that's not serious. That's not a serious way to think, and it's discrediting. But with this Samuelson, there's enough like corollary evidence that you have to at least ask, what's up? Like, it doesn't seem it doesn't seem like Samuelson would have made this unthinkingly, particularly given his personal animosity towards Schraffa in some ways. So why would he do this? It was against his own assumptions. Like, he was a marginalist, not a physicalist. So like, why would he encourage this unless it really was kind of to put, you know, the worm in the apple, so to speak?
I think I don't have any problems with it. I think it's highly likely that Andrew is correct here. And even if he's not, it's kind of irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant to promote a conspiracy theory as a serious thing.
No, I concur with you here, Derek, and I'm going to do a Derek thing myself in pointing out something that's, you know, tangential to this, but that might bring some context into it. So this has nothing to do with the text itself, but I think it's also sort of important to keep in mind-ish, is that Kleiman also believes in that the technology available today is specifically capitalist. So he believes in capitalist technology theory, which is basically saying that it's basically the argument of the master's tools, right? So whatever the future socialism will be, etc., we can't necessarily use the tools and the means of production and our computers, etc., that capitalism has built, because ultimately all technology created in capitalism is created in order to serve the interests of capitalism, which is sort of echoing the argument here that
except for the hammer and the sickle.
Except for the hammer and the sickle, yeah. So in the same sort of spirit that Lexi so eloquently laid out, with the sort of spirit of this argument, he makes much of the same argument with respect to neutral technology, saying that, you know, no, there is no such thing as neutral technology, because it's all there just to serve the interests of capital, and in the same way, there's no neutral tools in economics and so on. And I think, Derek, you're right to point out that this is at least to me sort of a weak point in an otherwise very rigorous, very rational and very sort of neutral argumentation. This is sort of where we're leaning a bit into murky grounds of conspiracy. I wouldn't exactly say conspiracy because that's too deterministic and that's too hard a term, but it's...
You know, I have a higher opinion of this section, and I would say conspiracy. Because, like, I would say there's a bit of conspiratorial thinking here, but again, I don't think he's wrong.
I mean,
about that.
No, I don't think he's wrong either. I'm just saying, if it isn't right, like if you're putting forth the description of conspiracy, like no, actually, I mean, fuck it, no conspiracy theory is 100% wrong, right? They all have some sort of nugget of truth. I'm just saying it's not enough for me that it's not wrong. If you're putting forward or hinting at a conspiracy theory, it has to be right. And
when you bring in some things Kleiman says outside of this book, it is relevant, and it's relevant in a way that basically anyone who disagrees with any part of this in any way can be, including MMTers, by the way. Tom.
Yeah, Tom.
Are all deviant heretics who have been led astray by enemies of Marx, and those enemies include everybody who calls themselves a Marxist.
Well, just to let you know, I asked Andrew about the MMT, and he put me on to a guy, another Marxist who was into the MMT, and he's also had a lot of to do with Professor Michael Hudson, who is an MMT guy, Marxist too. So I don't think Andrews is allergic to MMT as you guys claim. He certainly, I talked to him about it, and he didn't have problems with it. But anyway, let's move on. I don't have any problems with. Look, I just don't understand why people think there wouldn't be conspiracies against Marxist economics. I just think you had the fucking Iraq war. You think that there's not going to be a conspiracy against Marx? God damn it! Like, to me, it's like,
well,
it's fucking
yeah, but
slam
that's,
dunk.
I mean, honestly, I'm gonna this Tom is like a thing that shows up on your show a lot, where I've actually like wrote you letters chastising you.
Yeah, so much.
So like,
but you know, like, there are conspiracies in the world, and Marx is a massive threat to the establishment. So it would be reasonable to actually the funny conspiracies against it.
Marx is not a massive threat to the establishment. That is the
has been. Of course, he has. He's the biggest threat ever. Yeah, the biggest ideological threat ever to the establishment.
Like, okay. So here's my big beef with your argument here, Tom. Like, I don't exclude the possibility that, okay, one, yes, I agree that, Marx's economic theory is a massive threat to the powers that be, et cetera, et cetera. And I also don't exclude the possibility that there's a big academic conspiracy out there, out to get you if you do proper Marxist, value theory or something like that. But the thing about this book is that no one understands Marx's value theory. Like, no one understands the theory well enough to have a conspiracy or in order to suppress it, because they wouldn't recognize it even if it was right in front of them. Like, the reason that this book exists, to me, sort of is my argument against why there is or why there should be an academic sort of conspiracy against Marx's theory. Because if only Kleiman and Freeman and a couple of others have succeeded in producing it, reproducing it rigorously, then how on earth would that affect Samuelson? Like, it doesn't.
Look, I just think I've worked as a professional poker player, and you make decisions on probabilities all the time, and you have to make decisions on limited information. And all I'm saying is that, to me, it's a fucking slam dunk. I call, I win a lot of money. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I call and I win a lot of money, right?
Tom,
what produces your surplus value in the poker chips then, Tom?
Sorry?
What you know?
Sorry?
What is your labor theory of surplus value in poker then, Tom? Like you,
Not.
if you win all of the poker chips
It's
here, like
non-productive
what?
labor. Non-productive labor. You're just siphoning value off some poor bastards. That's all you're doing.
It's buy cheap, sell dear.
It is. It's just like working in the city of London. Right, come on, let's just keep going.
So last thing I'll say about this. So fuck me, I forgot. Whatever.
I would like to comment on this for a second.
Yeah, come on, Pouya.
I kind of wasn't so fond of Andrew's thinking in this section and the next section, mainly because I don't know, he kind of attributes these shifts in thinking to kind of like the great men, Samuelson, and he isn't. I would have really appreciated a more materialist analysis of why these things happened at this period of time, why people shifted.
Yeah. Interesting. This has occurred to me too about a lot of the way we think about this from this book, and I've said this before, is that there's a whole lot of voluntarism around academics who are somehow driving everything as the agents of change here, where I just don't have any evidence for that. I mean, I come back to the Doug quote that conspiracy theorists aren't paranoid enough. And I think this is actually kind of an example of that.
All right, I remember what I was going to say. So the first thing is, I actually do think there are neutral technologies and neutral economic assumptions. Not all of them are. Some of them are patently ideological. Some of them have a clear ideological cash value. And some of them are more or less just a tool. And in this case, Samuelson being as good of a mathematician as he is, having the agenda that he does, and look, I'm not saying that Samuelson needs to have a willful intent to deceive for this to prosecute. I don't think that he would look at this as deception. I think he would think of it as putting people on the right path. But even then, even if you see society as, multi-level selection mechanisms to try to stabilize itself, which I tend to, I still think there's room for enough evidence to have that poker player suspicion of like, is this guy doing what I think he's doing? I think he might be doing what I think he's doing.
He's bluffing.
I kind of thought Andrew was just thinking out loud in this period, in this section. It sounded like he was like, why did this happen? It just sounds like he's thinking out loud. And, I totally believe that these shifts in thinking happen due to, the state of capitalism at this period, starting in early 1970s. We look at the cyclical variations in profitability. You can see that trends in thinking in these depressionary periods do tend towards, in this
Marx.
depression, huh?
They tend towards Marx.
Well, they also tend. I think that they do tend towards, like, here he says Thatcherism and acceptance of rejection of Marx. We see in the 1970s and 1980s, 1990s, we see generally a rejection of Marx.
It's interesting to me because if you read his other book, it actually does cover the same time period, and it's not just like Thatcherism comes out of that. Labor in the UK neoliberalizes before Thatcher came along, and Clemens were aware of that. So I would say Clement would probably say he's just trying to deal with the specific instance. And while I'm coming down hard on the conspiracy angles of it, I do think that with Samuelson there, that since it's a viable interpretation because of both the circumstantial evidence and this is important, it only involves one actor. So all it requires is one person arguing in bad faith, and that's why it's convincing. But when you start looking at it as a larger academic conspiracy, which this does lead to, if you take it to, I don't buy it at all. I don't buy it for a moment.
Yeah.
Like I can buy it specifically to Samuelson.
But like, I think he's not coming up with the argument himself, Samuelson, remember. He's just basically tying it all together. All of these arguments have been made over the years, always, never, usually by Austrian and right-wing economists to thrash Marx. And he put them together, and he put some of Straffa's stuff in there too. And he put together this argument. But like, let's not think that someone like him has not got a place in society, certainly in the economics industry and academia in the West. He was the number one guy. You get the best guy talking and doing a detailed mathematical review and a critique of it, and it's in the biggest journals and getting huge amounts of it'll get a huge push. You know, that is going to have, you know, this whole idea of, you know, the great man theory, there are certain individuals who've got more power than others. He had a platform, it got pushed, and he's smart enough to know how to do it, because he was a fucking genius
but you're
level.
not being properly materialist enough, honestly. I'm gonna like push
I'm
back.
not saying it's just one guy, but I'm just saying like there are underlying things.
But Samuelson's just a product of his conditions.
Okay, fine, but like, so if we're gonna talk on that level of explanation, I'm comfortable with that. But there also is, like, you know, individual neurons firing here. There are like individual people. There's a mechanism going on, and Samuelson has pro-capitalist intuitions, and what the society generates, especially among its comfortable academics, comfortable academic scientists, they have these intuitions, and he's trying to get people on the right path. He thinks that these intuitions are right. That's what's animating his work. So of course he's going to promote this, and it promotes this ideological value. That's not what's important to him. What's important is that his intuitions are being promoted.
Well, let's talk about his intuitions for a second, because I just heard everybody equate him with an Austrian. He's a neo-Keynesian.
I never said he was an Austrian. I said most of them were Austrians. So Baum-Warburg and Borkovich were Austrians. Those guys were Austrians.
Did I say Austrian?
He was no, I did. I said Austrians, but I never said he was an Austrian. He wasn't. He was a
neo-Keynesian. He was a marginalist neo-Keynesian as opposed to a physicalist one. But I mean, like,
and Straffa was a Keynesian as opposed to a Marxist.
Straffa was a Keynesian, and also apparently thought of himself as sort of kind of a Marxist, maybe. I mean, the thing is, like, the elephant in the room is that I actually, if we look at the context of 1971 and what Straffa's doing, there is still a massive Marxist movement, like, physically on the ground. So yeah, there is that motivating it, but there's also emerging neoliberalism, which was anti-Keynesian, and I'm using neoliberalism here in a very specific, albeit correct way, as opposed to when everyone just means capitalism. And that kind of was, I mean, you want to talk about conspiracies, that kind of was a conspiracy, but it was like Samuelson's fighting that too. So I can see why he would be trying to push all these Marxists into basically fighting, fighting for Keynesianism.
Exactly, fighting for Keynesian. Absolutely.
And to me, where I kind of agree with Lexi, even though I just want to remind people of why the historical materialist stuff is important, because all this is happening because of crisis of profitability that neo-Keynesianism can't seem to explain. All right, that's the larger context for this.
Can we move on, because we're all like, we have our opinions and we're just going to keep going at for ages. I think we kind of all.
I am right, so we may move on.
We may move on. Derek has been kicked off. How can I? I can't actually kick Derek off. Can I see?
No.
I can eject him. Will I eject him? Right here, Derek. Do you want to do this next one then? the transformation of physical quantities.
God, sure. Since I was a jerk, I deserve it.
I'm only joking. I'm joking.
It's interesting because when we're criticizing the book and the milieu that surrounds the book, well, this paranoia comes up and this tendency to look at things ultra structurally, or inversely as a conspiracy, right? Interferes with the ability to scrutinize these arguments.
Right, it does. What's interesting to me, going through this dual system stuff, and again, I feel like, does anyone else when they read this, because these are the parts that feel like they're written for economists who know these debates more, that you're reading like the begots in the Bible.
He said begot earlier in the chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel that way because I feel like Samuelson begot Steedman, and Steedman begots Morshima, and Morshima begets to Sheikh, who I actually know, and I'm feeling like someone I know. But anyway, I think
when you're talking about these, big, usually in a scientific thing, there's the big guys who do a groundbreaking type of stuff, and that's just the way people talk about it, just to make it understandable. You can't talk about 4,000 economists at the same time.
Oh wait, yeah, I know that, but there's also a tendency in humanities academia, and it's something that I deal with, and I'm not actually accusing Clement of this at all. To use that to hide arguments and to misrepresent arguments by just having the name stand in for the argument, without actually stating what the argument is. Clement's not doing that, so I don't want to accuse him, but that's why my mind blanks, because having read tons of this material, whenever you start going through things like that, I tend to want to know, slow down, what are we actually arguing? And I think we get to that in page 51, and because this gets us back to the Marxists. Instead, such problems as above led Marx and economists to restrict their analysis to cases in which these paradoxes do not arise. The paradoxes, the supposed paradoxes arising from Samuelson, Steedman, and Morshima. Cases in which each industry continually produces more of its product than it and other industries use up. This ostensible justification for this restriction are that economies must be able to reproduce themselves, and that we should follow Marx by trying to understand reproduction of the capitalist system. Yet this reproduction can and does occur when this restriction does not hold true, as we shall see in chapter 10. This seems that the underlying purpose of the restriction was simply to expunge the perverse cases. The desire to make the simultaneous valuation work has come to dictate how capitalist reproduction is conceived and analyzed. So this to me is actually an interesting point. And it's one that cuts against the conspiracy thinking too, is that he's saying, once these paradoxes get pointed up and we see that it's hard, everybody just avoids them outright. So they just don't want to fall into the trap, so they won't have another paper produced about them, basically. And so everything gets weaker and weaker because they just don't look at the marginal or difficult cases. The arguments put forth in the response to the physics critiques were at first very weak. Even though the values are redundant, once physical quantities are specified, it argued, values exert their influences by determining the physical data. Right, 1981. Which right is that? Anyway, and the valued rates of profit set limits on the movements and the price of the rate of profit, shake, which is something I used to believe, actually. These and similar claims were little more than wishful thinking. In Shake's 1977 book, he also tried to reconcile physical simultaneousm with Marx's value theory. So this is where you see this kind of what is the word for these now, Lexi? Neo-Ricardians? I think that's what most people mean when they say this.
No, these aren't neo-Ricardians. The neo-Ricardians are the econophysicists. These are the single system interpretations.
I find that neo-Ricardian often occurs as a term of abuse. I'm not sure who claims it for themselves.
All right.
The econophysicists don't think of themselves as neo-Ricardian. Do they?
Well, I think Cockshot does. They have this idea of the value theory of price. That's what Andrew calls it. But they do seem to think that prices are basically just labor time.
I think.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how they would self-conceive there.
I'm fairly sure Scheik is also a neo-Ricardian.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I've heard Scheik referred to as, and I think even referred to himself as a neo-Ricardian. So like,
No, that's
Yeah.
why. That's why.
Okay,
Because he's
the language
he's
Scheik uses in his,
neo-Ricardian.
the language he uses in his new book is he just calls himself in the classical tradition. That's just like a
Right,
funny.
yeah.
it's like calling yourself a classical liberal. It's a way of saying something without saying anything at all.
No, but there's a reason why he's saying that, and that's because he's done his empirical evidence into the price and value link, and he's come up with his statistics saying that essentially price is value. Okay, Marx is not saying that. Marx was saying essentially, prices transform from values. Okay.
Right. Well, I've always just assumed that price was not value. The price was not value because that would be empirically easy to disprove.
Yeah. Oh, but so he has his done research. We'll see it in one of the later chapters where he says like 95% or 92% of price is determined by labor. And Andrew critiques that. But that's the reason why he's Ricardian, is because Ricardo used to say the amount of labor that's in it is the price. But Andrew says, and Marx would say, no, that's incorrect.
Right. And
that's why he's Ricardian. But when he comes to his stuff here, his single system stuff, that would lead him to be physicalist. So he's a physicalist, neo-Ricardian.
So we have an issue that
he has two separate solutions.
Oh, so that's why I'm confused, because a lot of these people go back and forth between incompensurate schemas.
Yeah. So
yeah,
Scheik did a thing where I think he did, one of them was a single system one, or I think he was a single system guy. And then afterwards, with the critiques coming from the TSI, I think, or whatever, maybe just he was doing it anyway, he did his empirical research. And his empirical research led him to be more neo-Ricardian than Marxian.
So basically,
when it comes to price determination.
What I read from this, and I read this into it. I got it from this paragraph. Wielding impressive and seemingly rigorous mathematical tools, the Straffians made mincemeat out of attempts to defend Marxist value theory, particularly from Scheik, because it's obvious that that's wrong. Unless the proponents of value analysis repudiate the simultaneous algebra that generally have physical conclusions, they cannot prevail. They did not repudiate it, and they did not prevail. Thus, Steedman's Marx as a Schafra effectively settled the debate. So basically, Scheik et al. Early on tried to offer this physicalist argument, and they get their ass kicked by the
Straffians. Yeah, the Straffians kicked their ass. Yeah,
and then they become.
And then he went to basically become an empiricalist.
I mean, that's dope, right? Like, that's pretty cool. Like, we could give it up for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, Kleiman seems to be admitted, like, if you don't, and this is why this book is interesting to me. If you don't put time in, the Schafrians do seem right. Like, there's almost no way to argue against them. So,
yeah. They're correct. Like, Straffians are correct if you value inputs and outputs simultaneously. That's it. All of these other ones are wrong. They're all physicalist, and the Straffians are right. Value matter, it's a load of bullshit. It's meaningless. All you have is price in the real world.
Well, it's not meaningless as so much as it is another school. It's not Marx. It's something else.
No, but I mean, I'm saying something more.
You don't out Srafa.
No, yeah.
Nobody out.
I'm saying something. Let's go back a page here. I got something to show you. Just one here. Okay. Let's look at this one. So,
the one paragraph I actually skipped. Of course.
No, a bit before. So here we go. Let's have a look at this. Recognition that the dual system model was physicalist led to an equally, if not more damaging demonstration by Morishima that Steedman played to the hilt. This is about I think this is the falling rate of profit, I think.
Yeah.
And Morishima combined a joint production model, a physical input-output system in which, roughly speaking, industries produce multiple products with simultaneous valuation, and found that values and surplus value may be negative, even though prices and profits are positive. This is why, in the passage quoted above, Steedman stated that value magnitudes are at best redundant. At worst, simultaneous value magnitudes are downright meaningless. So, like, the Straffians are kind of hardcore when it comes to it. They pretty much say, the only meaningful one is price. Value is a separate one. Sometimes it gives you ridiculous answers when you look at the maths, minus value and all of this type of stuff, even though you've got profit and positive prices and profits. So it's like they're basically saying value is nonsense. Once you value inputs and outputs at the start, you have price, and value is there, but it's meaningless. Like,
so
that's it.
abductio ad res- yeah.
And Kleiman agrees with
Adductio ad absurdum, though, means a simultaneous almost has to be a marginalist if you really take this at what it said, right? Am I misreading that? A physicalist.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no marginalism. This is just physicalism. So basically, this is what Andrew is saying, and the Strathians are correct. I am somebody who think they're correct. Okay. In saying that.
If you have them at simultaneous valuation, then value just doesn't matter, which I get, like, because it wouldn't matter. Like, it would just be this. This is, Lexi, when you and I were talking about this on a different show, and we were talking about when you try to do this and you end up making value some weird metaphysical category that is unknowable. Like, it does seem like the moment you take out time, that value becomes that, because value must exist in time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like once you value outputs and inputs simultaneously, you're saying that the outputs and the inputs are of equal magnitude, and once you do that, then time just does not exist in that theory, and thus it becomes this sort of weird mystical thing that it becomes completely impossible to speak about anything that's related to a value concept at all.
And so all you have is price points at that point, because price points are static in time. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Can I butt in here and just read another little paragraph here that Derek missed again? Jesus, Derek. Right. The peculiar I'm joking. The peculiar aspect of this controversy is that almost everyone was troubled only by the coexistence of negative values and surplus value with positive prices and profits. Few seem to be troubled by the notion of negative values as such. This is a deep point. Okay, how can you have negative value? It doesn't seem to make sense if people are working. Few seem to be troubled by this. In simultaneous interpretations of Marx's theory, negative values arise even in the absence of joint production. But this fact did not lead to any significant questioning of the notion that Marx was a simultaneist, nor did another paradox of simultaneous value theory that also arises even in the absence of joint production. Profit can be negative.
Did anyone else find that no, I agree with this statement, but this was actually really hilarious to read out loud.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, because at this point they're not. It's not that they're trying to cover that Marx isn't a simultaneous. They just think if they're aware of this, and they probably should be if they know math, then they have to be afraid Marx is wrong, right? Because this is Marx. This isn't This isn't just some weirdo interpretation by Bortkowitz like a million years ago. This is Marx.
Yeah, I don't think they think it's Marx. I think they think it's
come on,
Marxian. But how can they think that simultaneous valuation is Marxist?
Because
what Marx said.
Basically, they read the
text. Any sense?
Because they read like their teachers. Their teachers taught them that.
Yeah, because Marx was a terrible fucking teacher. I mean, come on. Have you gone into Capital Volume 1 blind and not Googled anyone?
I actually read it blind.
Not
Same
watched
here.
the David Harvey lectures.
I read it blind.
I've done that completely blind with no
prior. Myself and my missus read it blind. We read the first 80 pages together. She dropped out and I kept going.
I read it blind the first time, and I immediately went to outside sources. So I
did
not.
So there are two of you.
Did
I
not
thought
even.
the first 80 pages, or the first section was very difficult when I read it, and I also read it blind.
The first 80 pages were the hardest part, even going back through it again. But here's the thing about this. I'm actually supporting your point, Emmanuel. I read it blind and felt like I missed something major.
Me too.
So I kept reading more volumes of it, and then I got more confused. Then I went to David Harvey's videos, and they just made me mad.
Why? Because of his interpretation?
Well, because he would just like wave off, like there were whole problems that were bothering me, and he was just like, "Well, this just isn't worth talking about. Let's move on." And and then I like read Richard Woolf's explanations, which struck me as just weird and kind of like actually Keynesian. And then I read Ben Fine and Kleiman at about the same time and felt better. I mean, the thing about that, I had to go through like multiple. This is why I say the reading up blind thing is interesting. I went through multiple things where it's like, I kind of see where this is helpful, but I also kind of don't, because like when I was reading, particularly volume 1, because there's all kinds of elements of capitalism that commodity production is distorted in the current state because of IP and all this other stuff. And I was just like, I was literally thinking for the first time I read it through, I'll be honest, I was like, well, this describes capitalism as it came into being, but doesn't describe anything now. Let's move on. And that is the wrong answer to have.
Yeah.
But
I actually thought it was.
So my point is not that no one, ever goes into Marx's Capital blind. It's that if you do, you will be punished. And if you do, like, if you do go into Marx's Capital blind, I did to a certain extent, not through the entire book the first time, but through at least the first maybe 60 or 70 pages. And I wouldn't say exactly maybe the first 80 pages, but like, okay, say most of chapter 1. Even so, I still got a lot of stuff wrong.
I think,
so guys, we're not talking about like 4 guys sitting in their bedrooms reading Marx, or girls, guys.
But
that's not
these
what we're
people,
talking about.
Tom, these people are professional economists.
Exactly.
When would they possibly have time to go through all of Marx's Capital Volume 1, including all of the footnotes, which is where Marx conceptualizes most of the stuff, and his all of his volumes of theories of surplus value, and Capital Volume 2 and 3, and do the sort of methodological work that Kleiman has taken decades to do. Like, when exactly would they do this if they're under pressure to publish in peer-reviewed journals? Like,
I'm sorry, that's about the worst argument I've ever heard. That's like saying,
really?
How could an expert ever be an expert in the topic that they're being an expert in?
Tom, Tom, I think it's important to pay attention to an economics curriculum. It's bachelor's, master's, doctorate of science. It is a technical discipline. Most people in those technical disciplines do not engage with the philosophical literature or the proto forms of their science. They don't.
Yeah, because that's how science works.
No, to say
or
to,
just
to say
read out.
I'm not saying that
they're.
I'm not saying that this is a good approach to science. I think being an historian and philosopher of science is important to being a good scientist, but this is not how people do these things with this mathematical economics.
I'm sorry. Look, I can't believe my ears. Are you guys saying that the Marxist economists were living in this subculture where they're not exposed to loads of different Marxists of different types, and the arguments are going on? If that was true, how could Kleiman even ever get into a journal? which he did.
No,
how
no,
can
no,
they
no.
ever? How can they ever even have a forward and back, a theoretical forward and back, if that's not exactly how it works?
What I'm saying is that they didn't have a reason to reconsider the basic postulates of the theory. They wanted to do a theory of imperialism. They wanted to do this. They wanted to do that. They wanted to do magic tricks. They wanted to do interesting stuff. They didn't want to keep doing value theory over again. They thought it was settled.
That is absolutely not what the actual guys like Morishimo and Okishio and Steedman, the people who are doing
these are the
Yes,
exceptional economists. These are the exceptional heads.
Wait, let me talk. And they were the guys who found these odd things, and they never let those weird, obviously incorrect stuff into their brains. That is just beyond belief. If we can get it in by reading one page, yeah, and we can say, that's fucked. You're telling me these guys, these big heads, professors in these big colleges, don't understand these theories and not aware of them. They have to be, because they actually found the fucking things.
I can for sure tell you that most Marxists who work in the academia are not aware of them, because most of them do not work in the economic.
These aren't Marxists. You know, Steedman's not Marxist. He's a Schrafian. He knows exactly and precisely that argument there.
Well, right. He's not a Marxist.
And Marxists know those ideas. All of the guys that Kleiman and these boys are arguing with are Marxian economists. They are getting the exact same arguments that we're getting from this book.
Well, actually, most of
them don't accept them.
With aren't economists, to be frank.
Only some of them. Only like the later ones, like Romer and
Okishio. Beneziani. These guys that are not like Marxian economists.
No, they definitely conceive themselves as economists.
We're not talking about value formers. I just think, look, I just don't believe we're having this argument that you're saying that economists working specifically in that field can't understand simple equations and weird values that would make you think what you're doing is completely incorrect.
What I'm saying is describing the discipline as being I'm describing a discipline that's in some pretty piss poor shape. Yeah, that's what I think is out there. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's not in piss poor shape. Just like these guys don't understand the maths. Obviously, are smart guys. They're able to do fucking hardcore mathematical proofs. These guys are ideological in what they're allowing in. And sometimes it might be like ideological purely. Maybe sometimes it's they don't want all of their work to be wrong. And I can assume that there's ego in there. But definitely, they have to be aware that some of this stuff is. Because if I'm aware and you guys are able to see it, they're able to see it.
They may be deceiving themselves.
Actually, from a psychological standpoint, Tom, what you just argued doesn't make any sense, because the people who are most invested are the least likely to see the problems in the things they are invested in. It is literally a cognitive dissonance issue, and it is rife in academia. And having worked in academia, I see it all the time. So, like, it's not that I think they're too stupid to realize it, and what I think it actually causes them immense problems and whatever, but working it out so they don't have to abandon everything would be the natural recourse for most people. That's why science is so hard to progress, actually, because of that very reason.
Well, academics are just regular people. They can just get things wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Tom, there is nothing here that necessitates an ideological sort of, holding your hands to your ears and singing la la la, I don't want to hear it. That explanation is not necessary for the phenomenon of why people aren't paying enough attention to the TSSI. There may be lots of reasons for it. In fact, I do think there are lots of reasons for it, and I don't think it's an extraordinary claim to say that most academics and most professors are highly specialized in one or two very, very specific, applications of their science that, is read by 100 or 200 people tops. And that, you know, they're so specialized that going back to the foundational texts and so on, written 200 years ago almost, is not on their top priority list.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't see how that's an extraordinary claim. And
look, you don't need to read Marx's theorem to find when Morishima and these boys find these weird values. They're the ones finding it. They're not having to read 4,000 pages of Marx to find it. Everybody else who reads it. Look, if I'm a Marxian economist and I'm a dual theorist or I'm a single system theorist that's not a TSSI, and I see these problems popping up, it would make me think, like, either my looking at Marx is entirely wrong or Marx is wrong, and I have to become a
most
Shafian.
of them concluded that Marx was wrong. I mean,
no, but they kept to value. They kept the dual system. They kept values like Sheikh did. They go into single system theory, even though
you're talking about like the science of a very tiny field. Like,
yeah, I'm just saying. Look, I'm just saying. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's like these people. Like, not everybody who's doing science sticks in a narrow field. A lot of these guys probably have tenure. They can change. They can produce. They can change their minds. People change their minds in economic theory, just like in physics theory and chemistry theory, all the time. They change.
But you don't actually entire paradigm.
I just can't believe I'm having this argument.
Ever.
I found academics
because
to be
it seems sociologically naive as hell.
It's
it's just also every step of science I've ever read contradicts everything you just said.
Also, Tom, you have a degree in mathematics, right?
Yeah.
Have you read Leibniz and have you read Leibniz derivation and deduction, his original papers on the derivative in original?
No, I haven't. Of course, I haven't.
Exactly. No. That's my point.
Yeah. No, that's not. But that's not a point because.
Yes, it is.
That's not a point. No. That's
you trust.
That is not the,
you trust in studying. Actually, one of the reasons I'm making this point, Tom, is because Marx actually did this. He studied Newton and Leibniz in original, and there's actually quite an interesting footnote on this in Capital. That's a tangent, but I mean, you trust that if you study mathematics at a university today, you are getting perhaps not Leibniz's original texts and perhaps not, Newton's original notation. You are getting the modern equivalent, the refined version of whatever it is they worked out. And if you 30 or 40 years down the line, once you've gained your PhD and you're doing research work, some asshole called, Horowitz or something claims that he had studied the original papers by Leibniz, and in Leibniz's original notation, he divides by 0.
Okay, but it's precisely
there's no limits going on. The original theory was something quite different.
Point is
and therefore your entire career is wrong.
No,
the wrong math.
The two is precisely don't understand what I'm saying, because your point. Wait, just let me speak for a second, right? In this, if you want to make that analogy, which is right, fine. What the equivalent would be that I'm studying newer versions of integration technique. I'm doing Riemann integration, right? And I'm doing that, and then in one of the proofs, it leads to a logical fallacy. Okay, if one of the proofs led to a logical fallacy about it, it would lead you immediately to think that something fundamentally is wrong. That's your analogy, and at that point, you would go back and look at what was wrong with Riemann or the guys before him. Okay,
that's the analogy. Biology.
That's the analogy. It's not that.
And Tom, your response is perfect, because this is why Marx was so interested in the derivative, because I am lifting this entirely out of Kleiman's retelling of this story. I have not seen Marx's original papers on this, and I have not read Leibniz's original, but this is my memory of what the story as told by Kleiman, and it is that when he wrote Capital, Marx would take breaks, and one of his fun pastimes when taking breaks was studying the original work done by Leibniz on the derivative. And apparently in the original work done by Leibniz, he really does divide by zero. He ends up defining, you know, how can you get a finite value from the tangent of a curve, which has to be a finite, you know, defined number, at precisely a point which has zero width. So he does divide by zero, and Marx was fascinated by this because it's an apparent contradiction. It apparently, you know, it contradicts all of the axioms of mathematics, etc. And he played around with this, you know, trying to do his own maths, which, you know, ended up sucking because Marx was not a good mathematician, apparently. But the analogy here of you finding out that it led to a contradiction, that's sort of precisely the point, Tom. Because what these people are doing when they find that contradiction is to, you know, you always end up relying on hermeneutics. Did Leibniz really divide by zero? Most math textbooks say no, he couldn't. So, you know, we invent this concept of a limit, and this is exactly what they. Hello, Tom?
I think he got dropped.
Yeah, I think he got dropped.
Oh shit!
That happened to me a few times.
Oh damn,
Oh.
Tom. Well, let's make sure it's
Tom.
still broadcasting.
I don't. Oh shit!
Yeah, we're still broadcasting.
We are.
He'll be back on in a second, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So
Tom,
just continue.
Right.
We'll
Okay.
go on.
But yeah, the point being that Marx really took Leibniz by his word, but now in modern mathematics, we go back and say, well, he didn't really mean divide by zero. He meant, you know, we look at what happens to small, you know, minutia changes of x as a, you know, what happens when we nudge x just a little bit and we let that approach zero. And that's the sort of, you know, post hoc, let's make the original theory better, and let's correct Leibniz sort of thing. That's going on in maths, and it's the same thing as is going on in Marxist value theory.
I will say this for Tom, because I'm sympathetic to what he's saying, in the sense that like the fact that when people went to go and look for the contradictions, they ascribed these interpretations to Marx, like, is poor scholarship. There's no question about it, and Kleiman makes a big deal of this.
But the idea that it isn't super common in academia just eludes me, because, like,
right. But
like,
it's
I was talking to you about reading. We're going to take Marx out of this and economics out of it. I was talking to you about reading Darwin, right? And how I misread Origin of Species because I read it with everything we know now, and I read it back into what Darwin said, and it's not actually there, right? Like, and that's
what specifically?
The fact that I didn't realize, for example, that Darwin completely focused on the organism and all these gene things and everything else that we have, he did not have, which makes the early rejections and complications of his theory make a lot more sense, because there really wasn't a mechanism.
Sure.
Like, I went back and read with the mechanism in mind. I read that mechanism into The Origin of Species. It's not actually there. Right?
Same with Lamarck. People are rejecting Lamarck now, even though because there is no mechanism. And recently there has been this discovery of this transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, and this is kind of Lamarckian.
It is, but Lamarck. I actually go into this a lot. Lamarck, it wouldn't actually support Lamarck's theory because it's the mechanism is actually it's protein noise.
So regardless of that, like, I think what's important here is how
is epigenetic inheritance approaching noise?
Because it's literally the stress factors that causes mutate, like the stress factors cause protein breaks in the recapitulation of the genome. So yeah,
this seems like a directed change, right? This is a non-random change.
Well, it's non-random in that the noise is has a reason, but it's not. You can't actually completely predict what it's going to do. It's not a mechanism. So like,
Lexi, please take charge.
Yeah, this is very interesting, but we should talk genetics and epigenetics some other time. The main point here is that, to me, to sum up, that when you're looking back at these theorists, and there's a logical problem, Tom, as you're saying, it's shocking the kind of bad scholarship that we see here. But I think it makes sense if you consider a number of factors. The general Marxist capital sociology, like, that's going to be self-reinforcing. The fact that if you are good at math, you're probably going to be, well rewarded in capitalism, and you're probably not going to adapt a theory that needs to overthrow capitalism. And if you're, if you're not that good at math, you might just be intimidated by people, or focus more on qualitative criterion of truth because that's what you're more comfortable with. So I think there's a sort of selection mechanism here where you don't get the most mathematically literate people in leftism. You also have terrible guru and follower power dynamics that can inculcate people with the dumbest fucking ideas, any idea. So you have just a recipe for disaster that's sociologically emergent. And I could understand, and maybe even for naked political purposes, might promote the idea that this is some kind of conspiracy because it's so fucking dumb and so functional.
Right. So my last thing here is I would be more sympathetic to the argument that this is all sort of liberal bourgeois suppression of the fundamental Marxist truth or whatever. Not that this is the claim that Kleiman is explicitly making in the book, because he's not, but it's sort of hinting towards that.
No, it's far less structural than that for Kleiman.
Yeah, sure. But like this happens with every economist and thinker. Take Adam Smith, right? Okay. Even the Adam Smith Institute, and like, look at how Adam Smith is portrayed in most most college or university textbooks in economics. Like, Adam Smith explicitly says in an inquiry concerning the wealth of nations that the interests of the capitalists are fundamentally and directly opposed to the general interest of the people. Because, and it justifies this by saying that the rate of profit is the lowest in the most developed and wealthy countries. So the more wealth you have, the lower the rate of profit. Thus, the interest of capital is fundamentally opposed to the interest of wealth as such, and to the people. How many, like, that's a central argument. I mean, it's not like something he just mentions out of whack. It's a central argument to his entire thesis. How many of you have even heard that quote before? Like, this is not something that's constrained to Marx and Marxism and Marxist economics. This is this concerns, sloppy scholarship, and every textbook wants to weave a condensed logical narrative without getting too bogged down in the details. And this goes for Darwin, it goes for Smith, it goes for Simone de Beauvoir, it goes for fucking everyone who is a groundbreaking thinker, and where there's more secondary and tertiary and quaternary and quinary literature, then people read the original text. So this is why I'm not convinced by your argument here, Tom.
Can anybody hear me?
You're very
Not
quiet.
really.
You are super duper quiet, but I can kind of hear you.
You're very quiet.
Oh, also, when they discuss Adam Smith, they exclude the labor theory of value. They claim that he had a cost of production theory of value. Have you ever seen this?
Yes,
No.
I have. But the thing is, though, I was taught by my economics teachers were actually fairly honest to me about a lot of this. The thing they said, and they would say that's why nobody reads Smith anymore. I mean, that's what I got. In a former life, I flirted with becoming an economist for a while. So like, I flirted with becoming a lot of things, but it's one I really flirted with seriously when I was working for an insurance agency. And so, yeah, I think we've been talking over Tom though, because I hear a rumbling, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, Tom is there.
Can you hear me?
Very, very, very low.
Okay, let me just mess around here, see if I can actually. God damn it!
All right, take 5, audience. Go out and smoke a cigarette. We'll be right back. We're just going to be doing a little tech support here. Let's take a look at the chat. Let's go to the chat. Wow, we have had a lit fucking chat. All right. Dmitriev held that the origin of industrial profit does not stand in any special relationship to the human labor used in production. All right. There's
cool.
there's an out of print collection of his essays on Amazon. I bet you it's a lot of money. Oh, one of our listeners has there's a library copy that she can access, but she owes the library money, so
Damn capitalist.
yeah. Just get that to a scanner, Erica. I look, when I was going to school and I had access to the University of California's amazing Marxist library, I fucking scanned some books. I don't know if people are reading my scan of Making Sense of Marx. I don't know if people are reading my scans at all, but I did that, and it's strangely rewarding, even though it's basically robot work. So, anyway, what were you gonna say, Derek?
Oh no, so yeah. Any other interesting things other than obscure Russian economists that we can't get to because of capitalist bastards?
Let's see. A conversation about whether a 3D printing lab produces value.
Not without people. All right, continue.
Alex Welsh and Data Lore are sparring over this. Excuse me. Let's see.
I mean, I get that that's a difficult concept to grasp. Like, it took me years to figure out exactly how machines couldn't really do work except at cost, because
Right.
it does seem like from automation, and then that it would make sense, and then like socially necessary labor time being variable by social necessity, all of a sudden like, oh, never mind, it all makes sense now.
Yeah, like I don't know. It's I know some fairly intelligent people that just
Oh, I do too. I know some people
value.
who work for the U.S. who work as contractors for the U.S. government who literally thought that the current economic employment status would be impossible because of automation, meaning we're just going to have higher and higher unemployment until nobody was employed but robots.
Yeah.
Well, I
And-
think that's possible, isn't it? I mean, if you have accumulation in constant capital, you have the machines displacing the people. Like the constant capital, you can have negative accumulation in variable capital. It's possible.
Yeah. So let's see. Okay, I got more of this debate. Dead labor and production process, initial surplus.
What were we yelling at each? I actually like turned my head against why we were yelling at each other.
Oh, the reason that we got
I just found the idea that academics were super smart and would automatically see this to be just. I don't. Everything I've read on the sociology of academia and my personal experience in it indicates that that's just not true.
But fine, but like it's so far from ideal, right? Like, and so I feel like people that are like, I don't know, that impute kind of like motivations like this, because it's hard to understand why intelligent people would do this if you don't have like firsthand knowledge of it. Like I think it's not widely known how these things break down. Maybe I'm being like
it does seem to me like it should have been obvious that these problems were there in some of these later interpretations. But I've known many people to use hermeneutics to make all those things go away without actually having to redo anything. I mean, that was your point, right? And that's just a cognitive dissonance reducer. So like, there seems like that would be most people's first inclination. And I don't know that I think that would be true regardless of ideology.
Mm.
I mean, you have to think about all the weird Marxist ideas that aren't economic that we see that aren't even in Marx, that we see people bend over backwards to maintain. And I'm not just talking about like street cranks. I mean, academics too.
Yeah.
It's not
like what? Such as what?
What's a good example?
Primitive accumulation in the third world being an example of paying people in the first world more than their value.
Oh, that's kind of ridiculous.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, pick a pet theory that's come up in Marxism.
Yeah, someone defends it.
There's going to be someone who defends it, and they probably have more people that believe it than you think. Another good one.
I think that's the first world workers are exploiting the third world workers is just really ridiculous because, it's Chinese capital that's exporting the products here. They wouldn't export the products here if it wasn't, profitable for them. That just shows that their, profit rate equalization internationally is supporting Chinese capital. So
another example of it is related to it is everybody with world systems theory still does not put China in the core.
Oh,
wow. I mean, like,
yeah, that's ad hoc as hell.
That's ad hoc. So, and it's also like holding on to the theory as it was written in like the 60s and 70s.
It was written indeed. Yeah, that just ignores like what happened in the last 40 years.
I mean, so there's all kinds of stuff like that, and I'm trying to pick ones that I'm still having a hard time hearing you, Tom. I just heard you say hello, like in a cave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're louder this time.
Okay, do you have me?
You're just very
like
quiet.
In another room.
Let's see. Is there a way to turn you up? Is there a way to turn you up in the chat, like in the Hangouts, maybe?
Can you just guys let me talk for a second, because sometimes my mic takes a second to kick in correctly.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you very, very low.
Okay, let's all mute so Tom can talk.
No, I just want to get let me see if I can have a further look. You guys keep talking, but I think we should try and do chapter 3.8. Try and get this goddamn thing finished.
Yeah, we should get the technicals worked out, but yeah, might want to continue as well.
Yeah, because we're spending like what 4 hours a weekend, and we're only on page 52.
Yeah, let's roll.
Here, Lexi, are you guys reading? I think I was listening to one of these, and you said you were reading Stephen Gould.
Yeah.
Tom,
Yeah,
Tom, you have to go into the input settings. I'm
on
okay, sorry.
on and off. I've been reading, Stephen Jay Gould. I mean, like basically, I started. I read it in college and have got the book recently and been looking at it. Yeah.
I honestly think these Marxist biologists are just they produce the weakest arguments against, kind of like those Pinker and what's the other guy, Dawkins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's much better biologists that are non-Marxist.
Well, it's a question of engaging with the details and general frameworks. I think the Marxists have really good general frameworks, but do not want to engage with some of the details of the, neo-Darwinian like genetic stuff. And in that respect, some of the non-Marxist biologists have more developed responses to it. So I would agree in part, but I
find it kind of similar to this TSSI argument with, the claim is that they don't repudiate the assumptions that these people hold.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Well, now you're loud and distorted, but we're making progress.
Okay, how about this? Can you hear me now?
You're definitely distorting. You sound like you're in a noise band. You sound like you're in a noise band.
Hello.
You sound like you're in Death Grips.
But yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm not talking too loud. Is it all really bad?
It's way loud. You're distorting, so maybe turn it down a little.
How about that? Is that better?
It's strange if you have a gain knob on your microphone or something, because something is cranked and your voice is distorted.
Try changing the input device to anything that's not stereo mix. So do desktop microphone maybe. Try it. Oh, okay. All right, try that one and then switch back.
Hello,
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh shit! Now you're. What the fuck is going on?
I don't know.
Let
me try different mic.
Kleiman's right about capitalist technologies. What's going on?
Oh shit! You know what I think it is? I think it might be your Chrome settings. Hold on. Let's see here.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're back to where we started with you sounding way muted, but you're barely coming through.
Oh dear.
See, there is.
No, we lost time again. Back to the chat. There seems to be a lot of elitism among Marxists. Yes, to the point where I think like the whole notion of like cultural elites, when it's not just an anti-Semitic dog whistle, is an attempt to get at like the way in which snobby Marxists and critical theorists reflect a kind of privileged education that working class people resent. Like.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Woo!
There you are. We're back, baby. We're back.
Yeah, buddy.
Do you know what? I do you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to plug it in. I plugged. No, I'm joking.
Okay.
I got
Can you
dad
try
jokes.
turning it off and on again?
Yeah, I've got dad jokes, lads. I've got dad jokes.
No shit! You actually did forget to plug it in. I just saw it in your
No
in your devices list.
No, this is a new one. This is another one. I switched.
This is another mic. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
here. So I just wanted to say one thing is
Ooh.
like I just kind of want us not to exclude bad faith as a causal mechanism in this stuff too. And I think bad faith has a place. And that's all I'm trying to argue. That's all I'm trying to argue.
That's
sure.
totally
Sure. I think there's a a part of it is ideological. Surely.
Yeah, I mean, fuck that Samuelson guy. But
well, yeah, I think it's more of a there's another Marxist debate that we can have some other time about how ideology operates, if it is lying, if it is necessarily false, like what it means for something to be ideological.
Ideology.
No, that's why we're not. That's why we're moving on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like we have no problems thinking that Lysenko had bad faith. We're saying here that we can't think that Marxists can't have bad faith.
Weirdly, I think
no one's arguing that bad faith doesn't exist. Like my whole thing is that sometimes there's a fine line between arguing for bad faith and the scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail with a help, I'm being oppressed, and now you're seeing the violence inherent in the system. There's sometimes a fine line between those two things, and you have to be very careful when you're arguing bad faith. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, I think it's multifaceted, but we can't exclude it because it definitely, from my point of view, enters into everything to do with radical politics.
Well, with that notion and the struggle session now over, let us now reinterpret Marx.
Absolutely. Let's keep going. I can't believe all I wanted to read was one paragraph and it took about an hour. I'm sure everybody in the chat has taken cyanide pills.
Well, okay,
Tom,
you'd actually be surprised. Yeah, people are eating this up.
Oh my God, that says more about our listenership than anything else. Let's keep going.
We love y'all. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for spending your Saturday watching us do tech support. Seriously.
Oh yes, you're worse than I ever thought. God damn it. No, I'm only joking, lads. I'm only joking. Let's keep going. Everybody loves listening to an argument. Reinterpreting Marx. Now, who wants to go forth with this one? I can't even remember what this was. Now, how about who's Lexi or Manuel? You haven't done one in a while. How about you?
Right. Okay. So, this chapter is about the new interpretation. You guys remember what that was?
Yes.
Free beer to anyone in the chat who can explain what the new interpretation was.
Anyone in the chat who's still awake? Free beer.
Okay. Okay. Chat,
the chat. Yeah. So let's take it to the chat. All right. First time listener, love you guys. Aw. I turned down several social engagements for this ellipsis. Aw. But none of you know what so first of all, that's sweet as hell. Second of all, we are all intellectual masochists here. Aw. Thanks, man. So anyone in the chat, new interpretation, $200. I mean beer. Simoleons.
God damn it.
All right.
Yeah.
No, there's actually free beer at the end of the line here.
Oh wow, really? Nice. Free beer for Emmanuel.
Swedes who have free beer, wouldn't it?
Alex Welsh. Here it is. NI holds that the workers' actual money wages are the variable capital of both the price system and the value system. Slam dunk, Alex Welsh.
There you go, Alex. All right, free beer for you, Alex. Tell me where you live, and I'll buy you free beer. All right, cool. With the price system. Okay, so
not only that, it's also 5:30 in the morning in Sydney where he's writing that. That's
holy shit.
God.
Shostakovite, all right? What is the word? What's the word? I forgot.
Stakhanovite.
Yeah. Stakhanovite.
Yeah.
Alex.
Holy shit, Alex. Tell me if you're in Sydney, I might get you some good Hunter Valley Semillon, but all right, fuck it. Okay, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the new interpretation holds that variable capital is bought with money. And so, Tom, if you could get the quote. Yeah, here we go. So the NI was sort of the first attempt to make a single system interpretation thing. And they both emerged independently, as Kleiman says, and more or less concurrently in the early 1980s.
So this is kind of a rehash, Alex, or sorry, not Alex. This is a rehash of basically chapter 2.2, the last part of chapter 2.2, where he went through the dual system and the new interpretation. So it's kind of a rehash. Do we get anything out of this?
Yeah, it's about the dualist conception of constant capital.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of repeating ourselves, it's that, you can't have a single system interpretation without also considering that the value transferred by constant capital is directly dependent upon the price of its acquisition. So, yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah,
let's keep going. He does the NI.
Yeah, so I do. It's okay for me to feel deja vu when I read this chapter, like we'd already covered this.
Yeah, he gives credit to the first TSSI, which is Wolf, Roberts, and Kaleri.
Right. Is that Richard Wolff?
That is Richard Wolff.
Okay, yep. So that's pretty good.
So Richard Wolff did something good?
No. Richard Wolff is a kind of interesting, like, post-Althusserian economist who, like, kind of saw the problem with temporal valuation. So I actually have some respect for him here.
I mean, I do too. I just hear what
I'm sorry.
Generally, continue.
I'm sorry, I fucked that up. With the dual, he saw the problem with the dual system.
Yes, and his is still a simultaneous. So he's one of the SSSI guys. Okay, right. And also your guy Mosley, who you've been reading as well, and it seems to be Ramos. If we look at here, Ramos then switched over to TSSI, so it shows that it is possible.
Yeah, so some people do once they read it, they do convert.
Yeah,
so that's good.
But not the majority, it seems. That Richard Wolff as well. He's got a job. The place where he's working is with a whole load of MMT guys.
That's what I say. Yeah, I associate him with MMT people, like and like the Marx.
Richard Pollan, is it? No, is it Michael Pollan and those guys? Well, there was like some guy whose father owned like some NFL team, and in the 70s he gave him a load of money to start off a kind of a radical economics department or some kind of body linked to a department in one of the kind of Eastern universities. But the only Marxist they have on their books is your man Richard Wolff.
Yeah,
they have some other guys there.
Wolff, that when I meet Democrats and they're like, well, I like, if Richard Wolff's Marxism is the real Marxism, I like Marx, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that.
That's the value of Richard Wolff's popularization, is that it gets liberals to be sympathetic to Marx, even if it misrepresents Marx sometimes.
Well, yeah, he's not that bad, like he's obviously not like what we would all love, but it's interesting to see that he's actually a reasonable theorist as well.
Than David Harvey. So let's continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and he does speaking tours and that kind of thing. Anyway.
So he just talks about, again, we went through this last week, so it's not that he talks about how they're a little bit better than the NI and they're better than the dual system, but they still have some problems. And now he's just given the historical emergence here of the TSSI. We see here the first works were by Perez in 80 and Carcetti in 84.
It's weird to me that I've never, other than in this book, I've never heard of a lot of the people who are sympathetic to Kleiman. Like, that is interesting to me.
I've heard of these guys. Have you not heard of Carcetti?
I've heard of Carcetti independently of this.
He's got a new book coming out with Michael Roberts.
Yeah, I've heard of Carcetti, but only because of Michael Roberts, who I associate with Kleiman. But I've never heard of Perez other than reading this book, and they aren't referenced outside of. I mean, like when I read, widely in Marxist brain rot, and I don't see them referenced that much.
Yeah, this is true.
But I think that's just a function as well of like Yeah, no, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't write in English. Carcetti, is he Italian? I think he is.
I think
That
he
might
is.
be
Um,
why. That might be why.
But I have,
Yeah.
ironically, he's the only person that I've seen cited.
Okay. So maybe it's just reading the particular brand of Marxist brain rot I'm reading. I need to read different Marxist brain rot. Let's continue.
There's a lot of brain rot out there, isn't there?
It's like candy.
Okay. So here we go. So he basically, adherents of the standard simultaneous dual system interpretation have persistently charged that all these new interpretations are merely definitional tricks. If the alleged internal contradictions in Marx's value theory are not eliminated from within their own interpretive framework, they are not eliminated at all. So here he's getting into slinging some mud, my style. Even Mohan, a proponent of the NI, recently felt the need to warn his readers that the TSSI manages to preserve Marx's equality of total price and total value only because it interprets his concept of value differently from how it is conventionally understood. Such critiques ignore the hermeneutic principle, which I will discuss in detail in the next chapter, that a successful interpretation, one that makes the text make sense. Okay, so he's building us up now for what's going to be a big whole load of hermeneutics and build up a whole load of theory, chapter 4, which we won't do today. I thought we might get some of it done. But anybody have any issues with what he says there?
No, I don't. Although, I mean, I think that the particular hermeneutic principle is hermeneutic principle of charity is that you should always read the text as if it makes sense, if there's a way to make it make sense without changing the text itself, right? That's the specific hermeneutic principle we're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't think it's very controversial. I think it's probably quite standard.
I agree.
One important thing too is that the TSSI, in contrast to the SSI, that with this interpretation, the law of a tendential fall in the rate of profit is rendered consistent and repudiates the Accutio theorem.
Yeah. And yeah, we get into, so that's definitely a very strong, important point. And it's non-physicalist, so it maintains that value is important.
Yes.
And I think that even the SSSI ones, they're quite physicalist too, I think.
Because it's simultaneous.
Simultaneous valuation. So
simultaneous single system.
Yeah. So, right, we know we spent about an hour arguing over a silly point of disagreement, but like the whole chapter, in essence, we've gone through. For me, the basic, most important thing in all of that chapter was the 5p equals 4p formula. Would we want to put that up again and just to rehash? If anybody else thinks there's anything else important, what do they think it is, and where?
I think he could have made this this initial chat part much slower. I mean, much shorter. Just most of the things he discusses since the beginning of the book could easily be summarized with that equation.
Yes. I was thinking this either needed to be reduced down to the maths, or we needed more context. Like the balance was wrong. That's not the argument. The argument's fine. I just feel like from an editing standpoint, I feel like the balance of it was wrong, because it feels like maybe this is really like 3 good academic papers and not a book, or you need to like slow it down and really go into the nitty gritty more.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's like he's like treading a fine line between making it a popular text and introducing the TSSI and introducing the argument. Like I think the mathematical arguments we're making are very complex, and Kleinman might be trying to avoid going into them.
Oh, I don't think they are very complex. I think he does go into them. Like I think when you read actual papers, this is the actual math that's in it in the book. So like I just think it's like when you're writing it for a book for one of these small presses, you don't get a good editor that will actually help you structure the book, and I think it falls down on structure.
I wasn't really sure how Borkowitz's argument really worked. I mean, he gave me an example of Dmitriev, but
We'll get there.
Lorkowitz's system and Okishio's
Yeah,
theorem.
there's a lot of stuff that he goes into later in the book, which is also a little frustrating. Like, because we'll hit stuff and it's like, as I will discuss in chapter 10. I was like, okay.
Yeah. We will look. We're going to get to it in chapter 5, where it starts to kick off. You know, chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. The good stuff is yet to come. We've only had really one equation yet.
Right. And what an equation it is.
It is the equation. It's literally the equation that, like, one equation hits us straight in the square in the eyes.
One equation to fool them all.
I feel like so in Kleiman's infamous paper, fourth thing on the third thing, comma, he has this line where he said, you know, at worst, Marx is guilty of repeating himself. And I think this is a lot of what this book is. Like the entirety of the TSSI and the melt and why simultaneism is wrong is summed up in this one equation on page 43 and the table in 2.2. If you stare at these for long enough, right, and you work through them, it all sort of clicks into place. However, in defense of Kleiman and Derek, you mentioned some pacing issues and things with the editing and so on, and Pouya, I think you have a very valid point as well. In the defense of Kleiman here, I think most of those problems stem from the fact that he is in this book trying to attack all of his opponents at once while simultaneously trying to make Marx make sense for, you know, the first time reader.
Yeah.
And those two are in contradiction. So like in this chapter, he is simultaneously trying to make newcomers to Marx's theory understand, you know, where is all of this misreading going on? If what you say in chapter 2, and chapter 2 makes a whole lot of sense, and chapter 2 is like, even though we spend so much time on it, it's only like 20 pages, if that. You know, the feeling that a newcomer will have is, this makes so much sense. Why hasn't other academics, or what's the big deal about? And in this chapter, he tries to lay out how it all happened and how it all got fucked. And in doing so, he's also addressing a lot of his economist colleagues directly in an academic sense, condensing all of his academic papers into one. And I think what I've kept one thing. I'm sorry. I just want to finish this train of thought, and then I'll leave you guys alone. But in one of my dear friends' signature, so he signed this book for him. He said, you know, dear, and then my friend, I think of this as my autobiography. And I've always sort of kept that in mind while reading this, that this is sort of his magnum opus. This is his grand unifying, you know, debunking of everyone and everything, condensing all of his academic papers, like all of his struggles in trying to understand Marx, in trying to trace, like the chapter 3 is a great journalistic work, right? He tries to trace everything, you know, tracing it back to its source, and etc., and condensing that into, you know, really compact text. This is his life's work. And seen in that context, I didn't really pay attention to the pacing issues as you guys have, but I realized that's because I had this dedication. I had this line, I think of this as my autobiography, and unconsciously at the back of my mind. But so you're right, but also like I gotta give the guy some slack here. So
Yeah,
that's my closing thoughts.
The pacing issues never occurred to me either, but I mean, looking at it like as an editor, yeah, there's definitely some stuff that as soon as it's brought up, I'm like, what's that? That's interesting. Could we talk about that? And then there's some stuff that, you go over in 2 chapters and you think, man, what a discussion that would have made if that was woven together,
Yeah,
So
it's
little
sort of it's sort of the thing with this is not a criticism of Kliman's thought at all.
No, it's about presentation.
But I do sort of think that element of the multiple purposes of this book make it both the best and the absolute worst introductory text, like simultaneously. Because like the introductory text part, if I really wanted someone to understand Marx, I give them chapters 2, probably chapter 6,
right?
Probably chapter 8.
It's a different book, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a different book.
But I remember like Doug Lane and people telling me this should be your introduction, and I'm like, okay. I mean, reading it again, I'm like, this would be really weird as an introduction.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
You already have to know what's at stake here to really grasp why this is also important.
This is internecine French warfare.
Yeah.
I honestly think Capital is probably the best introductory text to Marx.
I don't.
I
actually really don't. I do not.
Why do you think that?
Because
I hear that all the time, and most people read Capital end up getting really terrible ideas from it because they don't understand all the arguments it's making. It's not particularly clear, and the translations are usually not even that great. So,
it's huge. It's really long, and
you're basically asking someone to read 5,000 pages as your introduction for one part of a. Because this is only one part of Marxism. Like, this is all of Marxism.
But it's so important to just understand how the system works.
Right, but that's not what people get out of it. People have a mystic journey with the text. If David Harvey is any indication of how people are reading this book, it is they are not getting a systemic understanding from reading Capital.
I don't think Harvey's that bad in his reading classes. I think you're being too harsh on him. But
look, I'm not even hating on the mystic journey. I during a period.
I'm not even saying the reading class is that bad, but the books he produces from it are that bad. So like,
during a period of grief, like I read Capital and I had like a mystic journey with it. It was pretty cool. But what was the best part is that I had been reading tertiary and secondary material for like years before I read it. So I actually knew what was at stake when I was going through the argument. So it helped me read it a lot. And I don't always like recommend people get acquainted with the arguments before diving in, because sometimes it colors the way you read the text too much. But I think with Marx, it's so impossible. He's just going through all these like classical ideas and debates and kind of shit. Like knowing where he's coming from for Marxist reasons is very important, I think.
Well, I also think
I agree with Pouya, though. I agree with Pouya. I think you should.
Yeah, I'm on team everyone here, but I'm leaning on team Pouya and Tom here for the same reason that Andrew gave us in the reading Capital closely class, is that the distortions are so vast in the secondary and tertiary literature that you really need
my point wasn't
Capital, but again, the asterisk as large as a fucking black hole here, or I put a galaxy-sized asterisk on that. And that is,
or no, I think
Marx is a terrible teacher in his own theory.
I think maybe the German ideology might be the best introductory text, but
I would still introduce Marx, but I always throw people out with like the critique of the Goethe program, because there's other stuff that's actually crucial to socialism that you will never get from reading Capital, because it's not about it.
Right.
Well, and what even about value, price, profit? Okay, or what about Chris Arthur's edited like version of Capital for students that has most of the fucking like word problems and pre-decimal shillings? Either translated into tangible math for humans today, or just cut out entirely. I think the problems with distortion are very real, but they're immediately apparent if you read one or two. If you read more than one book about Marx, like you immediately recognize nobody agrees. Like
no, I just think personally, I read it without reading anything of Marx, without knowing about Marx, literally nothing, and I listened to an interview with Andrew Kleiman on Doug's show or something, and I didn't find it that hard. I obviously had like things I didn't understand perfectly, but I felt like after volume 1 and did a bit of research, I didn't find it that. I found the first 80 pages very tough, but that's more the argumentation.
On
But
air.
Tom, I'm sorry. Like I don't want to be the guy who says this kind of thing because it goes against everything I believe. What
Spit it out.
What we're trying to do, but you say that, and yet you still think that Chapter 3 in Marxist monetary theory only deals with commodity money. And
okay.
Chapter 3 or volume 3? Chapter 3 or volume 3?
Chapter 3 of volume 1, Marxist monetary theory. At least that's the impression I got when you talked about MMT and the TSSI, and you said, the two can be perfectly compatible because MMT does not deal with commodity money.
But Marx's ideas on money and the knowledge at the time about how money arose was wrong. But like, just anthropologically incorrect. So like,
right,
that doesn't affect the rest
we're
of
going
stuff.
to. I don't want to get bogged down into a debate about Marxist monetary theory with you right now. I'm just saying that I think that your conception of Marx's monetary theory is wrong, and thus your interpretation of an entire chapter of volume 1 is wrong, and thus the only point here that I'm making, like, I'm not throwing shit at you, Tom.
You twisted bastard.
I kind of am, but like the point I'm trying to make is
you're wrong. You're wrong.
Such a terrible teacher in his own theory. I can totally see how most people going through Marx blind for the first time without knowing anything and without essentially reading it through Andrew Kleiman's or Alan Freeman's glasses will end up with interpretations that are erroneous and that end up being incompatible with Marxist theory. And we can debate whether or not your interpretation does that, but like that's sort of my point.
To take it away from Tom for a second, because I also don't really want to have this debate, because that debate's normally the me and Tom eternal struggle. But there's other people who I'm not going to name out of friendship, who I have gone through reading groups with, and who have even had correct interpretations, but when trying to struggle through it like ad hoc with a fresh mind, recapitulate some of the very mistakes that we're talking about. I mean, and that's what's in my mind right now. Is I've known people who even kind of know better, but when they try to like forget all the secondary material, end up recapitulating some of the same mistakes, even if they work their way out of it. But so there must be something there that isn't apparently obvious. I mean, I think a lot about Hal Draper's talk about how, like, one of the most maddening things about many Marxist categories is you actually cannot find them defined anywhere. And his example of that was, how do you exactly define working class in Marx? You won't find the definition explicitly stated. You'll find the components of the definition explicitly stated, but the actual full definition is not explicitly stated. So the fact that we have so much trouble with this seems to be inevitable.
Well, I think working class, right? You can kind of get what it is from the circuit of capital.
Really? So if you're not directly created a physical commodity, are you working class or not?
If you're dependent on the wage bill.
Okay, but depending on the wage does not make you a proletariat.
No,
Service
labor.
Well,
Service labor is a non-physical commodity. Like it's
non-physical commodities are not commodities.
Yeah, they are. It's consumed at the same time that it's produced. That's service labor, like a service commodity. That's all.
Yeah, commodities. Anyway, we're getting
well off track. You consume a massage when it is produced.
We're getting well off track here.
My point on that, Lexi, and you really know this too, is that this is not remotely agreed upon amongst Marxists, and they can cite the same text.
No, right. Point taken. That is point taken. I got
okay. If do we have anything specifically about chapter 3 before we hang up, because it's nearly 3 hours? I think the chat.
Yeah, I'm done.
There was one little tiny thing that I wanted to do, which was interject Sinha's response to Kleiman about this equation.
Is this going to start a fight?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. Then go.
Where is it? Do I have the documents?
It's Sinha's review.
We're Marxists. If there is no fight to be had, we will make one up.
Yeah, God damn it.
We'll find a way, people. We'll find a way.
What's the name of it called?
Reclaiming Here, let me. I'm gonna put it on. I'm gonna put it in the chat really quick. Anyway, so this review really pissed Andrew off. And is like he wrote like a big thing about how this is this is like terrible scholarship. I'm getting like bad treatment here. I'm not sure if it was subject for legal action or something, but here, let's see. I have the link here.
Oh, I think I know what this is.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, right. I do know what this is.
So
okay.
So he quotes. So Sinha quotes like the Dmitriev example on page 1. And by the way, this comes right after a positive review from none other than Richard D. Wolff in the same journal. So he quotes Dmitriev's mathematical proof of the proposition, and then he quotes Kleiman's refutation of the rate of profit equaling 25%, or I should say, challenging the assumptions of the model. And then this is all he says. If the above reasoning was true, then it would imply that positive prices could prevail only if there are diminishing returns in the system. If constant returns prevail, then prices would quickly fall to zero. But the question is, why should the price of a machine in the above equation fall to zero? It costs 4 machines to produce 5, so why should machines become free? Kleiman does not entertain such
fuck's sake.
Let us move on.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Could we have a little sound off about this now that we've
Other than the fact it's other bullshit? Like, okay, anyway. So what do you want us to respond to other than have a 5-minute hate where I actually sympathize with Kleiman?
No, it's
machines are constant capital. It says right there in chapter 2 that constant capital only transfers the value in direct proportion to its price of acquisition. End of fucking story. That's it.
The point the point wasn't the 5 minutes hate, although it could be. The point is this is like, as a novice and someone that was open to the critique and is waiting to hear, okay, explain to me why this is not like a respectable move. This just seems like uncharitable gibberish. Like,
and it's wrong. That's why Kleiman begins with chapter 2, right? Before he moves on to chapter 3.
Yeah, no, it's obvious.
I can see why one would get frustrated with a treatment like this.
Oh my god. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well,
if you get into is the Marxist theory of profit right? That book that's edited by Kleiman and Potts, and Nick Potts has done a review of this review, and this review, like, apparently was put into this journal without any without being checked. I think it's this one has been done without being checked, or the reviewer was doing stuff with Kleiman, and when it was asking him questions and stuff, and then misrepresented this, his arguments. But I think that's just a plain, obvious misrepresentation of Marxist theory.
End of the book.
End of story. It's just like you can't call yourself Marxist economist for me and then make that argument. That's just like being a creationist and a Darwinian. They're just opposite.
But worse than that, you can't claim to have read the book and make that argument, because he literally deals with that exact argument in the first 15 fucking pages. Oh God! All right, okay. So wrapping up, my Tom O'Brien has muted Derek.
No, there was some background noise. I was just doing it. There was background noise.
Could you mute your mic, Derek? Okay.
I didn't know that was so funny.
My closing comments is, if any one of you in the chats have dealt with us for this long, imagine us getting through all of the chapters here. I think we should make a final cut off of this, or like a final episode where we sort of pick out the golden nuggets of the entirety of the book and condensing it for people. However, if all of you who are listening to this have the time to listen through all of this and snipping out the good parts and deleting all of the tangents and condensing this into neat little episodes, that would be fucking awesome for everyone.
I've been doing that on the Emancipation feed. That's why it's taking a little longer, right? Is I'm going through it.
God.
Doing like a light edit to try to make it a little.
I love you. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, that's why it's taking longer. I haven't even put out the third one yet, so there's the price there. But
I think
that's awesome.
I think there's honestly, I think a whole different series of explaining Marxist economics through TSSI, in a really slick way, is a whole other project. To be honest, I think that's. That people, for beginners, or just for people who really just want to rehash and get it stuck in their head a bit again, because you forget and you just want to be able to watch a 10-minute blast and you go, this is how it works. I think there's a project there. I've just got one thing to say, kind of getting away from finishing comments. It's just one that I had earlier and I forgot to say it when we were talking about all these input-output tables and people actually using the simultaneous simultaneously putting inputs as outputs. In Russia, they were using, at some scale, they definitely were using Marxist value tables for planning purposes. It seems hard to me to believe that people would not have known that and known what they were doing.
Do you mean the reproduction schemes with Department 1 and Department 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard about them doing that.
Yeah, I really wonder.
Well, it was definitely a thing in Marxist economics. It was pretty standard. like that people would have these input-output tables when you would become an economist, you know, a trained Marxist economist.
Right.
You would have like value and labor, and you would be able to do prices and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're late.
So it just seems I'm just wondering if anybody else has any thoughts on that. Just something that struck me there.
Not really.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Will we say goodbye to everybody in the chat, and we'll try and reconvene this time next week. Who do we have in the chat this week? I suppose you've shouted out everybody when I was gone. So
a little bit. Let's see. We got Alex, Erica. We got a name that that you can pronounce, Tom. We have Melmoth. We have let's see who else we got. Data Lore.
We got clowning around. We got
the best name. Data Lore. We got 5-star.
5-star, yeah.
We've got Oh Man Damp. We've got first-time listener Dylan. Love you guys. Oh, we love you too, Dylan. We got Council Com. We got
Dave Solentuna.
Dave Solentuna was there, yeah. Yeah.
Wow. A lot of people.
Very good.
Call me up.
We also
we got clowning around. Someone's name clowning around.
I played in a band called Clive Star, and the old intro music from Alpha to Omega was us playing a track. I just thought people would.
Can we just give a huge shout out to Erica?
Oh yeah,
this wonderful person who's trying to track down this book.
Oh my God! Thank you.
And
please
copying
do
it for everyone. You're awesome.
Shout out, dear Erica.
Shout out, Erica. Okay, well, we're going to take it offline. Thanks everybody for listening. Sorry about all the nefarious IT issues. My router crashed, and then my mics didn't work. And thanks everybody for coming on. And sorry for all the arguments. Bye now.
Bye.
It was good talking to you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.